Major Stryker, as opposed to Minor Stryker, which was my nickname in high school, don't ask why, I'm embarrassed, is Apogee's Masters of Shareware, another successful attempt at vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. And as with most of their games, this one too, whether it needs it or not, has a story. Because why the hell not? So 8 years after the end of the Third World War, aliens known only as Cretons attacked the Earth. And we were so close, you know? If they were only called Cretins, not Cretons, it could have been so much easier. But to no avail, it seems. So the plan was formed to hit them where it hurts the most, within their own star system. You, my indestructible, fearless viewer, play as Major Harrison Stryker, and are tasked by the lovely Admiral Yoshiro of going to aliens' free planets and destroying their military installations. It's a last strike type of a mission, so if you fail we're doomed, and there will be no more bacon. So keep it in mind that your failure will effectively erase the salty delicacy from the universe forever. And that is something we cannot allow, and also worth fighting for, right? Major Stryker is composed out of 3 thematically unique and fun to mow through worlds, filled with numerous alien bodies and installations to destroy. There's also numerous various weapon upgrades and shields, and a whole plethora of power-ups changing how your ship behaves, influencing the gameplay itself, or adding bombs to your arsenal. The 3 difficulty levels available to pick between in the game are considerably different from one another, changing the number of enemies dramatically and also access to available power-ups. The bigger the challenge, the more points you get though, so if you're aiming for the score run, always pick the highest. Major Stryker is a tough game, so it's best to train on lower difficulties first before moving to more demanding ones. The graphics are as good as they can be on EGA, featuring large backgrounds and various unique sprites for enemies and foreground objects alike. Oh, and 3 levels of parallax scrolling, so something that was more often expected in VGA titles and not 16-color EGA games. If you're a fan of shooters, Major Stryker is a no-brainer, the game, not the soldier, and if you're not, then, well, it's not gonna change your mind about them. Boom, kapow, badoom, kerbang, and any other onomatopoeias that come to mind when thinking of bombs and explosions. That's what this little gem is all about. Bombs and explosions all around. While many of the late Polish Amiga games were not great, Mega Blast, that originated on the Amiga before being released on PC, is, well, mega fun that is. It's an excellent multiplayer game that can easily serve as a highlight of any retro evening with friends, providing hours of entertainment and competitive action regardless if drinks are involved or not. Though I would suggest, if I may, wink wink nudge nudge, that some juice boxes would be available at hand's reach. If you ever played Dyna Blaster or Bomberman, you know nearly everything that there is to know about Mega Blast. It's a maze-based versus game where players use bombs with delayed explosions to clear mazes' destructible walls and, most importantly, get rid of each other. The walls, when destroyed, may contain hidden bonuses and power-ups like increased explosion range, extra bombs, faster movement, so basically same stuff found in original Bomberman. But not only. There are also quite a few new ones, like ability to throw bombs, and these thrown bombs bounce off of each other, and maze walls too. Ability to walk through walls, mixed up controls, cause yeah, not all pickups have to be helpful, and bombs slipping out of your hands, which makes your character drop them automatically, which, as you might have guessed, is as annoying as it is fun in the heat of a battle. And all these are just the tip of a mountain of positive and negative power-ups that make Mega Blast so much fun. Up to 4 players can enjoy it on a single computer, and believe me, the more of you there are, the more chaotic and fun it gets. Having to keep an eye on all the bombs dropped by others, and not only yourself, and launching chain explosions is not only addicting as hell, but also makes you want to come back for more, even if you're the victim of one of those chains. I initially played Mega Blast on the Amiga, but when I moved to PC I made sure to have a copy too, as it's a timeless classic that never gets old and can be enjoyed and appreciated today as much as it could in 1995. But not all is sunshine and rainbows in the explosive world of Mega Blast. Because its strongest and best feature, so fast-paced adrenaline rush-inducing multiplayer, is also its biggest weakness. Because while it can be played alone against the CPU, it's just not the same game. CPU can never replace a real player, and all those things that make the game hectic and irresistible in multiplayer grow old in single-player mode very quickly. Mega Blast is a versus player game by design and should be approached only as such. Note that down. Mega Blast. That seemed like a great game, right? Well, not all Mega-named games are made the same. Mega Phoenix, while not bad per se, is not even remotely as good as previous Mega game was. It's a single-screen wave shooter similar to Galaga or Galaxian, and also retouched remake of an earlier arcade original, Phoenix. So you're always at the bottom of the screen, moving left and right only, and shooting upwards at ever-coming waves of enemies. The first wave is usually composed out of several small enemies arranged in patterns and attacking you at random in short intervals. Second consists of same, bigger enemies, the Phoenixes. These are more deadly and challenging to beat, apparently. The third only has one enemy, but it's the titular Mega Phoenix itself. When it's downed, there's the Phoenix ship, which is even bigger, deadlier and has few smaller ships helping it out. If you manage to defeat it, the game repeats all waves at higher difficulty. And I'm sure that you see already where the main issue of Mega Phoenix is, right? It's same waves, with same enemies, time and time again. Only a bit more difficult each time. It grows old fast, believe me. Especially that there's no extra weapons, no upgrades, and all you have to use against the Phoenixes are your trusty cannon and shield. Which is not very helpful if I'm to be honest. So if you have a live goal and absolutely have to experience all those shooters, then yeah, give it a go. It's not that bad if you wanna play it once or twice only. But Mega Phoenix is definitely not a game to find a permanent stay in your gaming library. I promise that this game is the last in this video starting with Mega. But definitely not the last time I will use the word though. I vouch that before this video ends, I will use Mega at least 10 times. Maybe more, who knows. You can count it with me. Anyway, Megatron VGA is a first-person maze-based 1v1 shooter in which you're behind the controls of huge bipedal mech. The maze is not traversed fluidly as in most other FPS titles, but in steps, kinda like you moved in early RPG dungeon crawlers, Eye of the Beholder and the likes. Which, while not a big issue, is not great if you aim for your game to feel fast-paced and action-packed. It's obvious from the first play that devs clearly didn't. And with a name like Megatron I expected much more. It's a name I imagine a generic in-game villain shouting into the depth of a fiery volcano mountain on top of which he stands on, holding his clearly wounded and profoundly bleeding side mere seconds before falling into it to die. Instead we got a slow, single-step movement system and even more disappointing shooting. Oh well, whatever, it is what it is. You have two weapons available, one is fast-shooting rapid laser, that does very little damage but is basically always available, and the second are slower missiles, which may take a while to reload and shoot, but offer considerably more substantial damage. So obviously the strategy for success involves shooting rockets whenever you can and spamming laser blast in between. Sticking to just one type of a weapon will hardly ever end well for you. Though it's highly questionable if playing this game will end well for you whichever way you do it. There's two robots to choose from, Medcat and Vulture, but for the life of me I cannot tell a difference between them other than how they look. So, gameplay consists mainly of you and CPU wandering around the boring grey maze in jumpy steps looking for each other. When you do eventually find yourselves, a shootout commences, and more often than not, 10 seconds is enough for one of you to emerge victorious. Shots, be it lasers or missiles, seem to have 2-3 frames each only, and same goes for explosions. As a result, it does not only look rather bad, but also feels unresponsive and unsatisfying. So personally I wouldn't suggest going out of your way to track Megatron VGA down, it's not worth your time. Metal Gear, a game that catapulted Hideo Kojima's career into stardom and made him a household name, like Kleenex or Cheerios or Pampers. What a legend. It's an amazing first title in a long-running series of incredibly popular stealth espionage action games that span numerous titles and over 30 years of releases, that not only introduced many of the concepts well known in gaming today, but also was a pretty captivating and well-playing story in its own right. You play as now famous but then virtually unknown Solid Snake, an agent of so-called Foxhound, and you're on a mission to infiltrate the Outer Heaven, a small fortified nation in which the villain of the game resides and threatens the world with the titular Metal Gear. A walking tank that's capable of launching nuclear warheads from anywhere in the world. Your mission is to save Grey Fox, another of Foxhound's agents, and gather as much intel on Metal Gear as possible. To do so, you must be as invisible as Bat. Man-Bat. I'm Batman. I know you are, Bruce, but I'm talking about another half-man, half-monstrosity. You don't know each other, he's more of a vigilante type of a hero, you know. He doesn't work with authorities and does everything his own way. Kinda like heroes from 80s action movies. He's a good-hearted bad boy and not a bad-hearted do-gooder. I'm Batman. Yes, you are. So, as I was saying, stealth is your best friend in Metal Gear, cause while you can approach the game from strictly shooter point of view, it will bring you nothing but continuous and disappointing failures. You have to avoid contact with the enemy whenever you can, keeping in mind that they can actually for the first time in gaming see. So staying out of their visual range, hiding behind objects, under cardboard boxes, or even walking behind them is a key to success. You'll also gather weapons and keys for doors, and believe me when I tell you that silenced pistol is your best friend in Metal Gear. Cause there wasn't many other as satisfying moments in gaming in 1990 as sneaking behind the level worth of enemies and killing them all one by silent shots. There's obviously many more weapons and items in Metal Gear, and most can be used to approach and complete the missions / levels in one way or another, so a replay value is quite high with this one. DOS's version, while obviously not being as popular as NES original was nearly as good of a game and could provide hungry for movie-like action teenagers days of high-pressure fun. And yes, I do realize that Metal Gear itself is not obscure in any sense of the word, but this 1990s DOS port was nowhere near as well known as original was. And it's a pity, cause despite some very dated presentation, it's a hell of a game. Would you believe me if I told you that one of the most fun two-player games in this video looks like something that you could prepare all the graphics for in Microsoft Paint in a span of 10 minutes or on your coffee break? Miceman is an excellent two-player versus board puzzle game, but only when played against a friend. As per usual, when you play it against CPU, sooner or later you'll work out flawless strategies to beat it every single time. So keep in mind that only full registered version allows for two-player fun. Shareware only works against CPU. Now, I told you that it's well worth finding and playing, I told you which version to track down, but I still haven't told you how to play it, and that's the most fun part of it. So the game board is 19 by 13 squares, with 12 mice pieces for each player sitting at opposing sides of the board, red and blue. The board is randomized each play, so no two games are ever alike. Well, unless one of you is exceptionally good at it, and the other utterly sucks. And it's definitely not you losing, cause there's only few as bright, as intelligent and quickly adapting people in the galaxy as you are, and chances of them being in the same place and time as you are virtually non-existent. The general idea here is simple: get your 12 mice to the opposing side before your opponent does the same. So each player takes their turn and can move one column up or down by one square unit. They wrap around, so going over at the top brings the contents of said column's top row to its bottom, and vice versa. When the player ends his move, all of his mice that are not blocked by blocks of cheese move as far as they can. They can move forwards and up and down freely, so the cleared path doesn't have to be straight line. When that's done, it's the other player's turn. The caveat here is that you can only move a column that has at least one of your mice in it, you cannot move a column that your opponent just moved, and you cannot move the same column more than 6 times in a row. Those limits do not apply, however, if all your remaining mice are in the same column. When both players happen to have just one mouse left, the game enters a sudden death mode, and leaves you with only 8 turns left till it ends automatically. When it does, player whose mouse is moved further ahead wins. If they're at the same distance, it's a draw. Miceman is an excellent versus board game that, while not identical to, does conceptually feel similar to the Piracy on C64. Which was another incredibly addictive in its simplicity versus board title. If you like two-player versus board puzzler games that require involving your grey mass in them, Miceman is well worth its price. Also, it's one of Manbat's favorite games because it involves mice, which he eats from time to time, as bats do. Let me start by saying that Mimi and the Mites is a freeware game, so it was entirely free even when it released. Keep that in mind when judging it. It is also very unusual, taking in spades from other classics to create its own unique gameplay loop. It feels like an odd mixture of Lemmings and Amiga's classic Benefactor. Not as good as either, but good nonetheless. So Mimi is a single-screen puzzle platformer with a very heavy, though not apparent at first, focus on the puzzling. The goal of each screen is to get Mimi to exit unharmed, and the titular mites are out to get her, and will actively chase her all throughout the game. And if they touch her, you'll lose a life. I'm Batman. No, obviously I wasn't threatening them, Bruce. I didn't mean their lives, but Mimi's life, the one in their proverbial hand. Sorry guys, he gets very agitated whenever violence is mentioned. So, one would think that obviously you'd need to avoid or dispose of the mites that chase you, right? And while you can sorta do the latter by zapping them with your gun or jumping on them from above ledges, temporarily stunning them, they cannot be killed. And it's good, because in most levels you actually need them to solve the puzzles that will allow you to leave. You will have to often lure them with your Mimi towards the switches, pressure plates and likes, cause there are some that only mites can activate. And these need to be used to either remove barriers or other features that stand in your way to freedom. You will then have to risk life and limb so that mites would activate those for you, more often than not timing it right so that in the same time you could activate another, as some need to be toggled at the same moment to work. The more you play and the further you get in the game, the more interesting mechanics and uses for mites will become apparent. At no point, however, you will be thrown into deep water. All will be introduced gradually, giving you ample time to learn and master them. You will unlock new weapons and ammo too, which can be used in various scenarios to help you. Mimi and the Mites is not an easy game, and despite it being fair and letting you familiarize yourself with everything that it offers, it will be challenging all the way through. But it's also a forgiving one. So if you keep failing at particular level all the time, the game will straight up ask you if you want to skip it, and continue playing and having fun from the following one. I would obviously suggest not skipping anything, as each challenge teaches you something that may be useful later on, but if you absolutely can't stand repeating something time after time again, and honestly I'm that kind of a person too, then by all means, go ahead. In the end, for a free game, Mimi and the Mites is an interesting and unusual take on puzzle platforming and one well worth checking out. You know what's worse than murders? Surprisingly, there's few things actually. Wars. Yes, wars are worse. Also mass murders. That's a bad one too. Ritualistic suicides are pretty depressing as well. And catastrophes claiming countless innocent victims are terrible too. And I just realized that those last few sentences alone may have cost me monetization on this video. Oh well, such is life. And you gotta say what you gotta say, right? So, what is also worse than murders are the murders in space. No gravity, very limited oxygen, and overwhelming cold darkness of the vacuum of space. Yep, it's pretty bad. Fortunately, Murders in Space, the game, is not. And it's a sequel to year prior's and much more popular and well-known Murders in Venice. The idea is an extension of originals, offering very similar gameplay, and it's also a mystery adventure game. What you aim to do in Murders in Space is to make sure that your crew survives 24 hours on the nondescript space station. The issue is, one of the astronauts is a cold-hearted killer, so your task is anything but easy. Especially that nothing really points to anyone in particular, at least not initially when you start the game. So what you'll be mainly doing is talking to all crew members and trying to be in the right place and time to prevent the killings. What times and places these are? Well, that's for you to figure out. And it's gonna be a task and a half, especially that each of the spacemen has something else to do in their schedule and often in different locations and different times. Despite very limited interactivity basically coming down to conversations with the crew and showing up to locations at certain times, the atmosphere of being alone on a remote space station with a killer on the loose is quite prominent if you like that kind of a thing. Generally speaking, even though the gameplay is rather slow, Murders in Space can be very enjoyable if you approach it with the right mindset, and let yourself get lost in dreadful realization of being the only one who can save others. Sadly, the game is not without issues. For one, you can ask only a few questions each time you see a crew member, and then you have to wait for them to move to a different location to be able to approach them again. And since each of them have some kind of a dark secret of their own, figuring out who the psychopath is can be really challenging. Worst of all, having the manual is a must, so even if you play a copy you found online, make sure to get manual too, as several important notes and passwords required during gameplay can only be found in it. I suppose it was a form of early analog DRM, but it's annoying having to either alt-tab to look stuff up in it, or print it out for a game you really don't know if you're going to like when you get it. Murders in Space is a very special title, and people either really like it or find it slow as snail and annoying as hell. Remember Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Now, what animal is faster than the turtle? Think. Yeah, you obviously right, a cheetah is, but focus. What animal is faster than a turtle, slower than a cheetah, and also a rather peaceful creature? Oh, and it likes carrots if it's helpful. Yep, a rabbit. Nice. Now imagine a world without Ninja Turtles, but with Ninja Rabbits instead. Huh? What do you think? Wouldn't it be great? A fast-moving, agile and deadly rabbit? Well, our in-game Ninja Rabbit is anything but ninja. I mean, not only he's not working under the guise of darkness and mystery, but also sports blindingly white kimono that's incredibly easy to distinguish from the background. If anything, the game should be called Anti-Ninja Rabbits. But whatever, let's start at the beginning. You're tasked with saving some random factory for whatever the reason, which in itself is a stupid motivation as they come in a game about animals, but it is what it is. So naturally, to do so you traverse 3 not over long stages beating up any and all animals and humans that come your way. Interestingly enough, despite you being a rabbit, most of them are much smaller than you are. Must be those vitamins in greens we kept hearing about as kids. If I would have eaten more veggies, I might have been bigger too. Perhaps even as big as a ninja rabbit. Still, while the graphics are not bad, they're not spectacular and sound is, well, present in the game. The gameplay, however, is where Ninja Rabbits really shows what it's made of. And it's mainly manure, it seems, as it's not only boring, but even the combat, so supposedly the most fun part of it, feels like an afterthought with no weight behind any of the hits. Sure, blood specks fly everywhere when you hit anyone, but gore has hardly ever saved the game. Now, just because I'm dumping on Ninja Rabbits my little puss of disappointment, it doesn't mean that the game like it doesn't have its uses. Because it does. I mean, if you wake up one day and feel like it would be cool to complete a really bad game, then Ninja Rabbit's 3 levels shouldn't take you too long and you'll have your wish granted in like an hour or so. Or, if you'd like to show someone how not to make a side-scrolling beat-em-up, it can also serve as a pretty good example of that. See, I'm not just a glass half empty. I see some light in this otherwise dark tunnel of a bad game. Ninja Rabbits is not broken, it's just not fun. Have I covered worst games before? More than once, easily few dozen? But with a name like that, Ninja Rabbits gave me false hopes for a fun title. Perhaps the fault is partly on my side for overhyping myself with Ninja Turtles initially, but it changes nothing, the game is not good. Okay, I will most likely butcher this title cause it's part English, part Korean, and I'm neither, but Allmang Jolmang Paradise is an arcade shooter made by Korean developer called Family Production, featuring characters from their other games. It's a third-person from behind-the-back 3D shooter conceptually similar to Space Harrier. Up to 2 players can have a go at it at once and pick between 8 Family Productions characters to play as. There are 2 ships from Illusion Blaze, 2 mechs from Iron Blood, 2 heroes from PNGT, and Shaki and his wife from Shaki the Wolf. And if those names sound alien to you, that's alright, cause while the games were published in the West, they were really obscure and hardly anyone knew of them. Each of the 8 characters has their own unique weapon, thematically correct to the game they came from, and a special super attack that depletes their health, but is incredibly powerful when used against the enemies. And since we're on the enemies, there are tons of these, and they differ in design quite considerably, even if largely serving the same function. So being a cannon fodder on your way to the bosses, which in itself are pretty fun to beat even if not overly challenging. Every character starts at his/hers/its unique stage, but after completing it the remaining ones are identical to all of them. There are no weapon power-ups in the game, which is tad disappointing, but I suppose a number of different characters makes up a bit for it. You do get to collect money from defeated enemies though, and it can be spent in the shops where you can purchase additional lives, sidekicks to help you and other useful items. Allmang Jolmang Paradise may not be the most innovative or creative game out there, but it's just fun. It took other games' simple gameplay formula, polished it up with fresh coat of paint, meaning high quality colorful graphics and fast sprite scaling on a bed of lush backgrounds, added decent sounds and music to round up the presentation, and finished it off with a really enjoyable and fast gameplay loop. It's a package. And while there's not much novelty in OJP other than the bosses and different characters you play as, it's surprisingly addicting and you'll hardly want to put it away if you start playing. And that's as much as one can expect from a good game. Also makes me wonder why it wasn't as popular as it could have been given how decent it is. It may be a combination of things though. It released under DOS in 1995 when Windows gaming was already spreading its wings, and came from Far East with what I can only imagine was a minuscule marketing budget. I have obviously no proof to support these claims, it's just how I feel. One way or another, it's a great game. What a start to the new season of our DOS series, don't you think? Each game, even if not great, seems to be unique in its own right. But it's irrelevant how I feel about them. What do you think? Were any interesting to you? Or maybe you found something to try out? Let me know in the comments below. Oh, and mega 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 mega. I think it's about right now. Ring Cycle is an action-adventure straight from the industry veteran Mike Singleton, that you may know from his Lord of Midnight series of games. Never was a fan, but they're called classics, no doubt about that. And as games go, his next, after this, Ring Cycle, is quite terrible. The story is not very coherent and based on Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen, a cycle of 4 operas incorporating German and Scandinavian mythological elements. Very odd choice and one I don't fully understand, but since I'm not versed in classical music, I'm not gonna hold it against it. So while it's an unusual background for the game, it's interesting at least. You play as Siegmund, son of Volsung, and you have to find and collect 10 holy relics, learn about the mythical purpose and about Siegmund's own past. And as you play, you also collect fireball ammunition, flagons of meat and other items that may come in handy during combat encounters or otherwise. Talking about combat, it's not great. Not that the rest of the game is, but it's worth pointing out. It plays out like a broken FPS where you try to drown the enemy in fireballs while avoiding their shots yourself. It's not fun. The world is viewed from either first or third person perspective and is rather large. And I don't want to rehash what self-help books say here, but size doesn't matter. It's the technique that counts. It's the content. And in any case, in Ring Cycle there's not much of it sadly. So the world, while large, feels empty, desolate and worst of all boring. If you add to it poor controls, lousy dated on the release graphics, and lack of clear and involving direction, you end up with, well, Ring Cycle. So unless you're on a desert island with absolutely nothing else to play, avoid it at all cost. I don't want you to think that all games in today's video are going to be bad, so here you go. Retribution. Retribution is a first-person sci-fi combat simulation, and it's pretty good. But before we get into that, let's talk about its story a little. Early into 24th century, humanity was in shambles and on the verge of extinction. The environment was in awful state, the food was scarce, and most lived in constant, permanently unsatisfied hunger. The outlook was beyond grim, and we were doomed. It was the case at least until the Krellans arrived, advanced alien species that came and stepped in, saving us in one sweep alien move. They showed us how to live in peace with nature and each other, shared their advanced technology, modern and groundbreaking medicine procedures, and last but not least, taught us how to terraform and settle on distant or barren as our own planets. We were saved. Retribution is composed out of 11 action-packed campaigns, each with 4 unique missions. And when I say action-packed, I mean it, because while there is a story to follow up in it, about the game's protagonist seeking retribution for... actually, I'll let you figure it out yourself. So yeah, anyway, there's a story, but you're likely to ignore it entirely and just focus on frantic shooting and completing of often very demanding missions. Because while Retribution starts simple, the difficulty ramps up quite quickly. Too quickly in my opinion, but it's nothing you shouldn't be able to handle being the universal badass that you are. The graphics, while sadly not as VGA, are pretty decent for VGA, running on developer's own voxel engine and featuring a lot of various targets for you to pew-pew into non-existence. In that, Retribution is kinda similar to Wing Commander series, so it has an overarching story and much more immediate and apparent combat gameplay that takes the forefront of it all. While quite obviously Retribution is not as good as Origins Classic, it's still a fun action title. So, if you're into this, you'll have a lot of fun. Reaper is an interactive FMV movie adventure, because by 1996 we still haven't learned our lesson and we're still releasing these monstrosities into the wild, hoping that one of them will be a good one and will stick. And with Reaper, we kinda hit the nail on the head, as it's pretty good actually. Reaper is dark, tense and atmospheric noir sci-fi cyberpunk adventure. A mysterious and unknown individual, known only in the eye of public as the Reaper, is causing panic, killing supposedly random people in a brutal manner. After each kill, he lets you, the protagonist, know. He sends you a message and boasts about it. Why you? Hard to tell, but maybe because you're a reporter working for the Virtual Herald, currently on the Reaper's case. You're Jake Quinlan, and the Reaper is either going to make your career or break your spirit and mind. No other outcome seems plausible. Sounds interesting? Trust me, it is. In fact, it's probably the best FMV game I've spoke about to date, maybe short of Under a Killing Moon, but I have a lot of melancholy for that one, so I may be biased. Reaper is intelligently written, believable, involving, and most of all, excellently acted out. There's no devs in this one playing characters, it's all professional actors on top of their game. Let the fact that Christopher Walken is giving a top-notch performance in Reaper be the proof of how much attention and care was given it to succeed. And it does, on all fronts. Reaper, however, first and foremost, and despite the FMV, is an adventure game, and as such, it's fantastic. While you'll typically for the genre explore numerous locations, examine objects, find clues and solve various puzzles, you will also indulge into tons of dialogues, and arguably these are the most fun part of the game. At least for me, as they're well written, believable, and all the characters don't feel like placeholders, but fully fleshed out people with their own needs, wants, motivations and goals. It's a blast. Some puzzles will require you to use your brain, while others will test your mouse controlling skills and reflexes, especially those that take place in cyberspace or shootouts. Reaper is one of the best FMV games ever made, and it's so well written and designed in fact, that it would be a very good adventure game even without the video clips. If you're into either of the genres, make sure to track it down and play. If looking at Rooster, Polish action shooter gives you weird vibes and feels like you've seen it somewhere else but more polished, better looking and sounding, then you're right. Cause you have, in Alien Breed series of games. Rooster is a top-down sci-fi shooter that's not bad per se, it's just not great. The moon base, used as a scientific center housing the biggest minds in humanity, is working on new kinds of deadly weapons. If keeping them all in a single remote location was a good idea is a question for another time, as the base has been attacked, overrun and eventually taken over by the terrorists from Mars. And that's its most immediate problem. You play as Rooster. Yes, like the male chicken. The best, strongest and smartest special forces commando soldier in the world. Maybe universe. So basically yourself. And you're sent to deal with the terrorist scum. The game is composed out of 4 rather large levels, but unlike Alien Breed, you don't have to kill everything that moves. You can't, even. Some enemies are indestructible and you have to avoid them. You also have to be careful where you're shooting not to accidentally kill an innocent scientist or destroy something that may be required later on for progression. Be more careful than in Alien Breed is what I'm saying here. Look and then shoot, rather than shoot at the first sight of any movement. There's a fair amount of environmental puzzling in Rooster 2, with switches in various locations, computers requiring appropriate diskettes, teleports and different machinery like reactors, turbines or generators that may require locating and switching on. So I'd argue that it's more of an exploration/puzzling title than the original that was more action-packed. And while it may seem like a good choice for some, focusing on something else than killing, from my point of view, the superficial lock switching and terminal operations get boring fast, especially that all the environments look very samey and you rarely ever feel like you're discovering something new and interesting. And the levels are very labyrinth-like in their design, requiring a lot of memorization to be able to complete them, which is not everyone's cup of tea. And since there's no save function of any kind, you'll have to power through the entire game if you want to complete it each time. So it's that difficult. In the end, Rooster is not a bad game, it's just not very well balanced, not as good as original was, but if you like shooters, you should find something in it to enjoy. Stargoose is a very unusual sci-fi team space shooter. But space is just the background to all the shooting, as you're really flying over a space base or spacecraft of some kind that's semi-3-dimensional, and your craft is gliding along its surface, adjusting to the hills and valleys of it, which, while unnecessary, is a neat graphical effect adding to the presentation. Unusually enough, the levels are not your typical point A to point B fare, and they loop around until you collect 6 colored crystals. So even if you don't grab them straight away, you'll be back to do so on your second loop. When all of them are picked up, you can enter the portal that will warp you to the next level. It is advisable, however, to take all the defenses out first before focusing on collecting crystals, especially the stationary ones, as they are deadlier than the enemy ships. There are no weapon upgrades to speak of in Stargoose, your gun and rockets are all you have really, which is disappointing to say the least. Especially that the ammo is finite, but in occasional faux 3D tunnel sections you collect orbs to replenish your fuel, shield or ammo. So there's that at least. Since you can control your speed of movement during gameplay and that in turn controls screen scrolling speed, you are your own difficulty level slider, which is an interesting concept that I'd like to see in more games. In short, the faster you fly, the more challenging the game will be. It's not all great in the Stargoose realm though, there's few things I'm not happy about and I fear that most others wouldn't be either. For one, the enemies' backgrounds and gameplay loop is very repeatable. All levels feel same, even if they aren't, and enemies, while looking different, are not distinct from each other whatsoever. Other than that, some of them shoot at you and others don't. But worst of all, there's no end to the fight in Stargoose. You just keep going forever. Because when you beat the last 8th level, the game loops back same way its levels do, and you carry on. And since there's no bosses of any kinds whatsoever, it gets tiresome quite fast. It's not bad, don't get me wrong, Stargoose is not broken in any way, it's just other than the 3D surface gimmick, it doesn't offer any novelties and it's very basic. Not a game for me, but you may find yourself liking its loop if you're a fan of shooters. Savage Warriors advertised its novel at the time technology called 3D Biomotion, which simulated bones and joints on characters, effectively making 2D characters appear 3D-ish. While they may not be real 3D, they appear so, and it's a nice change from all the other 2D fighters that were on the market back then. Oh yeah, cause Savage Warrior is a versus fighter, and that's probably the most important thing about it. It's also one I kinda forgot to mention at the beginning, which is just a testament to how chaotic I am. Anyway, the backgrounds are beautifully hand-painted and look excellent for the time, much better than some of the early 3D pre-rendered ones that other 3D games at the time used. And the game plays in high-resolution SVGA, which makes it sharp and pleasant to the eye. The elusive mythical, only known as the Master, brings in 10 great warriors torn out of their times to pit them against each other to see who's the best and worthy of challenging the Master himself. So you'll be able to pick between likes of Nephis born in Egypt more than 3000 years ago, Fergus, who's an Irish warrior from the 10th century, and World War II veteran Hank from USA, to name a few. Each of the warriors is unique not only in how it looks, but in the style it fights in and special moves too. Other than the Master, who's the final boss of the game and your ultimate challenge, and the other 9 fighters, there's also 5 other characters that you may get to fight against, but they're not playable themselves. Interestingly enough, few of the stages that you fight on allow for grabbing and hanging on a tree branch, hook or something similar to deliver attacks from above. As much as it's an interesting novelty, its use case scenarios are limited if non-existent. Because while you can kick while hanging, you don't get to use any of the ranged attacks and can just end up hanging there with your opponent patiently waiting for you to get back down or mauling you from afar. Savage Warriors also features replays, and these can be played at a much more attractive, more 3D feeling camera angle and are a nice, even if unnecessary touch to spice up the gameplay. And if you like fighters, give it a go. I don't know if I could or even should tell you about Secret Mission, because it's, well, secret. But if you swear here and now that you will forever hold what I'll tell you and never share it with anyone without prior checking in with me or Batman, then I will. Just say, I'm Batman, in the comments below and I'll know that I can explain what it's all about. I'll wait. I'm glad that you agreed to my terms, thank you. I'm Batman. What do you mean that not everyone complied, Bruce? Well, you're the world's greatest detective, find them and deal with them. No, I'm not telling you to kill them, but a broken bone or two, maybe a concussion should send the message. Don't bother me, man, sort it out yourself, you're the tough guy here. So, yeah, thanks if you agreed and better pack up and leave if you haven't, as Man-Bat's on your trail. Secret Mission is a very fun, obscure, spy-themed adventure game. Mind you, I did not say point and click. cause it doesn't use the mouse whatsoever. You control your character in an isometric world using arrows and convoluted pop-up menu for all the typical control verbs and inventory. Which is so annoying that I'm not surprised that Secret Mission did not manage to secure a notable following. I mean, the game is great otherwise, but the controls make it so unbearable. I genuinely and completely understand players dropping it solely based on the unfriendly design. Anyway, Secret Mission starts in the late 1950s in a fictional Southeast Asian country of Opalia, with you waking up in a random hotel room with no recollection of prior events and a memory loss, not knowing who you are and what you do there. Soon enough, however, thanks to a beautiful unknown seductive lady, you learn the truth, which is pretty grim. First of all, the country of Opalia is on the brink of a coup, with a prime minister plotting president's assassination to take the power for himself. And if that wasn't enough, you're not just a tourist. You're a double agent pretending to work for the Americans while really spying for Russia. And given the strategic location of Opalia, both superpowers are heavily invested in having their foothold there. Secret Mission is a stellar espionage thriller full of twists and turns and surprising situations uncovering unexpected details when you least expect them to. It's a blast. A blast that most will never get to experience in full, as the aforementioned control scheme is so unnecessarily convoluted and unergonomic that playing Secret Mission for a prolonged time with most of its puzzles being inventory-based is just a nightmare. But if you persevere and power through, you'll find yourself in the middle of captivating and hella good story. Shaki the Wolf is a rare DOS Korean arcade beat-em-up platformer. A mouthful, I know. And guess who you're going to play in it? I'll give you a hint, it won't be a fox, robot or an alien. It's also not steroid-fueled superhero, even if that's often the case with you. Yep, you got it, you play as a wolf. And there's a story to it. You're a ruler of your peaceful animal kingdom and your subjects love you. I mean, you're orange, you're a wolf, and a good upstanding guy at that, so what's not to love? The idle piece, however, is not long-lasting, as a villain Midnight Sword, rotten-hearted pure evil lion warrior, takes over your land and brings chaos to it. From this point onward, it's up to you to get better, stronger, faster and more good-looking, find the Midnight Sword and defeat him, reclaiming your kingdom and freeing its inhabitants. Shaki the Wolf is composed out of 7 stages, each ending with a boss fight, last one defended by the Midnight Sword himself. And I gotta say that all of the bosses are pretty neatly designed and unique. Enemies too are quite varied and fun, and the levels are filled with tons upon tons of environmental obstacles. Sounds cool? Well, it's only sorta cool, cause level design and enemy placement makes the progression at times annoying because of the cheap health losses caused by how things are placed within the levels rather than your lack of skills. But if you get used to it and keep that in mind, you'll quickly learn how to move around to avoid situations in which you lose HP because of how game is made. Fortunately, Shaki the Wolves is a beat-em-up platformer, so every enemy has HP bar, and so do you. Which means that even despite the cheap damage level design, you're not going to die from hitting most dangers, and will just have your HP bar reduced slightly. So there's that. Shaki's graphics are excellent, colorful, with big and nicely animated sprites, and all that on large backgrounds, which would look even better if they had a layer or two of parallaxing, but that's just me nitpicking. It's not necessary really. Sounds are really good too, and the music is appropriately lively to the action-packed gameplay. I really feel that if the publisher would spend more than 57 cents on games promotion, it could have been a hit in the West too, as it's fun, beautiful and sounds great, and that's a recipe for success. Back in the day there was a movie called Under Siege. This game is not about that. Siege is a game that should have been a great hit among strategy fans back then, and yet it wasn't. I feel that many have lost the chance to experience something special when it came out by jumping onto other, flashier games. Today, if you give it a chance, it won't obviously make as much of an impression as it would have then. It doesn't mean that it's not fantastic, it's just not as jaw-dropping anymore. Siege is a real-time strategy, though that's a bit of an understatement as it's not based on typical for the genre loop, and it pits you in the middle of conflict between good and evil, humans and orcs if you will. There's 24 included scenarios in Siege and an added level editor if you like to take upon yourself to try to make your own. But before you do, I suggest playing few of the built-in ones as they are great fun and will allow you to familiarize yourself with how everything works. One side plays as the defender, the holder of the fort, while the other tries to storm it. The fortresses can be big or small, simple or filled with various defenses like moats, inner walls or towers, and it's up to each of the sides to do their best to win. There's 17 kinds of soldiers, magic uses included, and various siege equipment like battering rams and such. Soldiers can be grouped and given various orders like shooting on sight, holding positions or patrolling, and since the battle can take days if not weeks like in real life, you'll often have some of your wounded soldiers recovering in hospitals before rolling back into combat when healed. It will take time and careful strategizing to complete each scenario, is what I'm saying here. The game is displayed from a bird's-eye view with 3 zoom levels, and while it may feel a bit clunky at times, it's at least readable and gives you a clear overview of the situation. CPU player is rather good on both attack and defense, but raising difficulty to higher challenge when you get used to playing the game as is rather disappointing, because it doesn't change the way the CPU plays, but rather penalizes you with being able to deploy less soldiers than you would have otherwise. On the outside, it may seem like the loop of defending and attacking fortresses will get boring quickly, but the included scenarios are all well thought out and the editor prolongs the fun factor of Siege quite considerably. If you like strategies, especially those that require tactical planning and are played in real time, it's a gem not to miss. While Soccer Kit was well known and beloved title on the Amiga that it originated from, it was rather obscure on other systems it released for, DOS being one of them. And it's a pity, cause it's excellent. It's a side-view football/soccer themed platformer, while the ball is your main tool in both traversal and combat. You can kick it to attack the enemies, it can be used to collect the items rather than you having to go and grab them yourself, and you can jump on it to propel yourself much higher than you could have jumped otherwise. And that's just scratching the surface of what you can do with it. It's super useful. Soccer Kit plays like a console title. It doesn't feel like a computer game at all. It feels like something that should be run off a cartridge and played with a gamepad. And yes, that's a compliment. Anyway, there's obviously a story to Soccer Kit, and while it's simple and as silly as they come, it sets the mood for gameplay quite well. So aliens heard about Football World Cup, came to Earth and decided to steal the trophy for themselves. Because while they have the technology to travel between the universes and see the stars, they cannot craft a large cup made out of piece of shiny metal. Yeah. Anyway, as they were fleeing away with it, they crashed and the cup was broken into 5 pieces that scattered and each landed in a different part of the world. You, being the football aficionado that you are, took upon yourself to travel around the globe to get them all back. So, you set off to do just that. Soccer Kit is divided into 5 worlds of 3 levels each, and they are Britain, Italy, Russia, Japan and USA. They all have their own unique design and landmarks and are pixel graphics marvels to witness. And since we're on the subject, the graphics overall are fantastic. The attention to detail on each sprite, big or small, each piece of background is well beyond what you expect from a PC platformer in 1994. There's color everywhere, spilling from the screen all over. The presentation, generally speaking, is just phenomenal, and state of the art for the genre at the time. A little omission though that's not game-breaking in any way but rather disappointing is lack of rain and parallax scrolling that were both present in Amiga Original. It's not a big issue, but I feel like it could have been easily coded on PC. That said, I've not written a single line of code for DOS, so perhaps I'm wrong. All in all, Soccer Kit is easily one of the best and most fun DOS platformers of all time and definitely in the top 3 for the year, even if it was not as popular or well known as it was on original platform. I hope that today's 10 was varied enough for you to find something you'd like to try out. I tried covering few different genres and hopefully succeeded, but I won't know until you tell me, so make sure to hit me up in the comments below. Quatris 2 Plus is a Tetris variant and a sequel to earlier Quatris, with no numbers, pluses or any other symbols in its name. It was originally released as shareware, and as such it offered 3 out of just under 20 levels available in the full version for free. Some might say it's very little content, but I think that's more than enough to learn if the game is worth your time and money. Spoiler, it really is. Anyway, gameplay-wise it uses near identical concept to Tetris, but adding quite a few new block shapes to the mix that add variety to the challenge. It also features differently sized and shaped playfield, fun. You obviously also die when the screen fills up, so if you ever played original, you'll feel here right at home. I remember having a standalone handheld Tetris clone portable game back in the day and spending hundreds of hours on that bad boy, to the point that all the markings on the buttons wore off. Quatris 2 Plus is as addictive, and also offers 3 kinds of bombs: wipe, match and super bomb, which all work a bit differently and help a lot in those near-death situations. There are also challenges in Quatris, yes, you heard that right, challenges, so every once in a while when you do particularly well, the game will ask you to complete a little extra task. And these are quite various, but math quizzes with simple equations to solve or memorization games are the most prominent of the included. They are neither too long nor challenging, so they don't get in the way of playing, and are a nice palette cleaner between all the Tetromines falling bonanza. Quatris 2 Plus is one of the most fun versions of Tetris that I played, and one that definitely deserves a modern remake and a permanent spot in services like Game Pass for instance, as it's a great title to play for a little while between other larger and more time-consuming games. Queen was a cult British rock band that's responsible for many of the biggest hits of the 20th century. Their music was also remixed and used as a soundtrack for Queen DI, the game that we'll talk about now. It's an action-adventure game very similar in its design, but not the theme, to Resident Evil titles, meaning that the environments are in large part pre-rendered with some sparse 3D objects and all the characters are 3D and overlaid on top of that. Oh, and the camera is obviously fixed and swapping its position between the scenes, often erratically when you're at the point where two scenes switch. It was never a design that I would enjoy in games, as it was easy for me to get confused when it jumped between different points of the same room. The setting of Queen is rather dark, gloomy and depressing. It's a dystopian future where the world is ruled by the all-seeing machine called the Eye, which has eradicated anything and everything, promoting creative expression. The world is blunt, sad and submissive to the evil Eye. You play as Agent Dabrock, an operative cooperating with the Eye, an enemy to the populace, a traitor. But in the course of your duties, you accidentally rediscover a cache of old rock music and are promptly detected and sentenced to death in the so-called Arena, a live TV show where contestants battle former Arena champions called the Watchers. A cruel irony if you ask me. Anyway, doesn't this plot remind you of something? It serves very strong The Running Man vibes for me, an old underrated sci-fi flick with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Whatever. This is where the game starts, and from this point onward you take upon yourself to escape the arena and destroy the Eye, as you finally saw it for what it really was. Interestingly enough, many elements present in the game were later on adapted into the musical We Will Rock You, so if you've seen it, you should recognize some story bits here and there. I've never had a chance to see We Will Rock You, or any other musical for that matter, so don't take my word for it. It's a curiosity I found about the game online. Gameplay features a lot of exploration and combat, hand-to-hand and melee, so if you like that in those games with claustrophobically small room and corridor design, you'll enjoy it here too. Queen is not a bad game. It just came a little late, as it was way too long in development, so upon its release not only it looked a little dated, but also did not play as good as some other competitive titles did. Dusk of the Gods is an isometric view, non-linear action role-playing in an open world taking place shortly before Ragnarok, an epic battle at the end of the world between the god and giants in the Norse mythology. The sage Mimir predicted the future of the gods' realm. He proclaimed that Hela will raise army of the dead, that Loki, god of mischief, will lead against Odin. Thor, Heimdall and Freya will all fall pierced by the horn of Loki, and the fire giant sword will cover the Asgard in flames. The future seems inevitable, but is it? To counter the grim vision and prevent the Ragnarok, Odin, father of all gods, summons you, a fallen hero, to change the tides of the future. And he couldn't have picked better. I mean, you've saved the world at least a dozen times since we've started with the series, a universe once or twice, and easily 5-6 civilizations from extinction. If I remember correctly, you once even saved a small and remote melee island from hands of the evil pirate LeChuck too. No small feat, I must add. That's a story for another day though. Anyway, you're taking a role of a resurrected warrior sent out by Odin to change the destiny of the gods to help them avoid the fall in the coming war. Unlike grand majority of titles of the time, Dusk of the Gods offers a full day-night cycle, non-linear gameplay, and huge fully open world that you can explore to your heart's content in any order and way you see fit. As you travel, meet many characters and combat different enemies, you get progressively stronger and acquire newer, better weapons and armor. Dusk of the Gods is an unusual for the time role-playing that's sadly plagued by rather simple and blunt combat system, which is the greatest of sins in games that center their entire gameplay mechanics on action combat. If it doesn't bother you too much though, the setting and story is pretty interesting and the game is worth experiencing. If not for anything else, then at least to see if you'd like it. My most favorite genre of games are turn-based role-playings, then strategies, also turn-based obviously, then business/economy simulations, and management games. Then there's the rest in no order in particular between them. Dynatech is one of the first few. So from the get-go, Dynatech is a title in a much better starting position than any other random one could be, as it's a business simulation through and through, and I love this. It has one downside though. English version is nigh impossible to find, and the German one, because of the complexities of gameplay, is difficult to comprehend by those who don't speak the language. And I don't, so... Anyway, the story background to the gameplay states that in the future the natural resources of Earth are either depleted or on the verge of being so. And to combat the starvation and fall of humans, a giant company called Dynatech is created to secure the growing demands of Earth. It helps those willing to discover, develop and exploit distant worlds do just that, by supplying them with anything that's necessary, be it in terms of technology, hardware or know-how. You're one such someone who realizes the potential for huge profits and wants to try to get a piece of the potentially limitless in terms of gains pie. So you can and will buy facilities and spaceships from Dynatech, you will find, extract and develop products and machines from raw materials and also farm food too. But most importantly, you'll keep an eye on Earth's ever-changing supply and demand economy, adjusting your production output and sales to maximize the profits. And while it may not look like it at first glance, the underlying economic models of Dynatech are surprisingly complex for a game from 1991. which if utilized properly guarantee a long-lasting and enjoyable trading experience and potential in-game millions to be made. Unfortunately, however, Dynatech is not the easiest of games, and having access to the game manual that explains many of its concepts in detail is recommended. Not necessary if you're willing to power through everything by trial and error and many failed attempts, but having it makes the first few games considerably less frustrating. Interestingly enough, while there was a huge potential to add some side activities to the gameplay like sabotage between the competing companies, space piracy, industrial espionage and such, the devs omitted this entirely and focused on polishing the business side of things. It makes the game feel well thought out, but also lacking variety a little. Despite what may be shown in the footage, as it's not the easiest to get a good one for the game, Ica Phantoms is a sorta hybrid between exploration, action-based combat, puzzle solving and arcade game. It features a very unique and unusual interface and design, and looks like something that I should love. But before we get any further, let me quickly tell you what it's all about. You, as a protagonist that you usually are when playing games or watching videos on this channel, are coming back from a 6 years long mission in space. You're loaded with money and keen to get back home to spend it, and have a little R&R in luxury that you crave for the last few years. It's not meant to be, however, as when you arrive, Earth is unlike the blue ball that you've left behind. It's dark, grey, and a huge alien ship hovers above it menacingly. Worst of all, with use of alien installations, it's draining the planet dry of its natural resources. Yep, the aliens, titular Ica Phantoms, are not a friendly bunch whatsoever. So, even though all you want to do is sleep for the next 2 days to recover and then spend few weeks doing literally nothing on a poolside somewhere, drink in hand, it's not in the cards for you, and you'll have to once more save the world. So, you steal one of the Eco-Zeppelin crafts, get down to Earth, and will try to reverse the process before it's too late. Sounds cool, right? Yeah, I thought so too. The game feels fiddly most of the time. The concepts that it portrays seems to be tied to each other via invisible strings that feel as if they should not be together under the same roof at all. So, you'll traverse some kind of an alien tunnels on Earth in step-by-step 3D dungeoning a la Eye of the Beholder, you'll shoot at frantically moving enemy ships, you'll crack some codes on the scout ships, you'll enter various buildings to find even more codes for the buildings that you'll find later, and blast enemy spheres or whatever they are with a robot that you'll control. And so on and so on and so on until you finally move to the next stage. You'll also try to destroy alien buildings by setting off explosives and then shooting at their outer walls looking for a weak spot for some reason. It's odd to say the least. If I could only comprehend how really these and few other sequences connect together so that I could have a clear picture why it makes sense, I would find it to be a better game. As it is, it feels like a lot of random busy work just to give you something to do, and I don't particularly enjoy it. Perhaps you will or did, and if that's the case, let me know why in the comments below. Future Dimension is a really cool and undeservedly so obscure title. It's a shoot 'em up featuring horizontal, vertical and even faux 3D behind the ship levels in its gameplay loop, which in turn makes a very varied and fun gameplay. But while the styles change quite often, catering for fans of different kinds of shooters, there's something missing in Future Dimension overall. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like it, but it feels as if it was made by AI, that just sampled all the other shooters on the market, condensed them into a single executable file, including all types of viewpoints, obligatory 4 different weapons that are upgradable by picking up green symbols, added other add-ons like homing rockets and helpful ship satellites, and bombs for a good measure, all to come up with a very unique experience that somehow still felt a bit generic anyway. Once again, I like it. But I was never a true shoot-em-up aficionado, and other than Warblade, with most I'm fine with completing them once or twice and then forgetting about them forever. Future Dimension kept me interested with its variety. It features 6 large levels, 3D pre-rendered cutscenes and minigames inspired by classics such as Pac-Man or Galaga between them. Sounds and graphics are all pretty good, definitely spot on what you'd expect from the genre in 1996, and fit nicely around the bullet hell loop of the gameplay. Should you play Future Dimension today? Definitely. It's a fun and good game. It may not be the genre-defining one, but you're not gonna get bored playing it. Batman can guarantee it. I'm Batman! See? I told you. Now, go, grab it and play it. Gender Wars is a futuristic sci-fi squad-based shooter bearing certain similarities to Syndicate, mainly in how it plays and an isometric top-down view, cause its story couldn't be more far off to that of Syndicate. Not worse, mind you, just entirely different. In the far-off future, the planet is decimated by a number of violent and polluting civil wars, and the remaining population is forced to move into vast underground cities, kinda like vaults in Fallout. Numerous stretching long years conflicts and general disagreements between the genders on how world should look and rebuild resulted in population split into 2 opposing factions, male and female. and the disputes that they had with each other soon turned into full-fledged titular gender wars. This is where the game starts. You can play as either male or female styled and have to lead it to ultimate victory, which, given how we reproduce in real life, could also be considered an ultimate loss. The victory is achieved by leading a small group of up to 4 soldiers through a series of increasingly more demanding missions. There are 14 for each side for a total of 28, and they all have different primary and secondary objectives. The first need to be completed for the mission to be successful, the second only raise your score upon its completion. Soldiers who survive missions intact with all their organs and limbs still where they're supposed to be, gain experience and raise through the ranks, with the squad leader being the highest of honors. And the squad leader needs to be present during each mission, regardless how many soldiers participate in it. Missions cannot be run without them. And when the last squad leader dies, the game is lost. Gender Wars, for me at least, was much better game than Syndicate. I was obsessed with it. Not very good at it, but I played it maniacally. Sadly, my copy at the time was of questionable legality, so I missed all the cutscenes and introduction, so I played it as a faster, more entertaining, more varied and better looking Syndicate. And not as what it was, as I only had a vague knowledge of its story. Gender Wars has some bugs, sure, no doubt about that, especially with how soldiers use the lifts, or don't use them to be precise, standing atop or bottom like NPCs in most MMOs, firmly glued to singular spot, waiting for you to come back for them. And even if they eventually figure them out themselves, they often require a couple of attempts before they mount the lifts correctly. But all those bugs are superficial only, and the game itself is just great and a definition of a hidden gem. So if you enjoyed Syndicate at all, give Gender Wars a chance, it may be up your alley. The Eye of the Typhoon may be the most obscure game in this whole video, as it never had an official Western release and only ever came out in South Korea. It's a 2D one-on-one versus fighter with 12 playable characters and 2 in-game bosses. The characters are Hoya, who's the main hero of the game's storyline, Roy, rugged Western adventurer, Saori, who's Kunoichi, so a female ninja, Chohong, a female warrior, Wang Chang, Chinese mahjong player, Mui, a mysterious jungle warrior, Nelson, a gentleman fighting with a whip, Tlaloc, Aztec warrior, Dalma, old tiny fighter using a magical stick, Musai Taro, who's a ninja, Natasha, a huge Russian female fighter, Jarkil, a masked dancer, and Powell is a sub-boss, with Mahesvara being a final opponent of the game with 2 separate forms, one male and one female. Each of the playable fighters have basic punches and kicks and their own unique special attacks. It's a pretty standard fare for the genre really, but that's not bad, it's just not surprising in any way. What is unusual though, at least for fighting games on PC, is that it uses similar zooming effect to that in Art of Fighting on Neo Geo and in the arcades. So it zooms in and out the camera depending on how close the opposing characters are from each other. Interestingly enough, there's also a taunt in the game, but there's no in-game mechanics attached to it. Probably an oversight in development, and it has no use other than the aesthetic and to leave you open for attacks. So it's best to ignore it altogether. The Eye of the Typhoon can be played in single player, 1v1 or 2v2 modes, and it's pretty fun. It's not good enough to challenge juggernauts of the genre like Street Fighter 2 Turbo or Mortal Kombat, but it's plenty fun to stand on its own legs. Story-wise, many years ago, during the times of one of the Elden Eastern dynasties, a martial art known as the Eye of the Typhoon was very popular. As time went by, however, it was gradually less and less practiced and eventually forgotten, to the point of being a myth among martial artists training other popular styles years later. As Western countries started practicing various fighting styles and perfecting them, the long-forgotten style resurfaced somehow and everyone jumped on the train to learn it. Hence the tournament was born, to test the knowledge of the best fighters from around the world in it. The plot, as you see, is super silly, but as in most other games in the genre, it's also unimportant in the scope of what the game's about. And if you're a fan of fighters, this one's definitely worth tracking down and playing. For a long time I was under the impression that Hired Guns was originally developed for Amiga and then ported to PC. It's obviously incorrect as they were made concurrently. Is that important in any way here? Not really, I just thought I'd let you know, cause chances are you might have thought the same. Anyway, Hired Guns is a light role-playing / dungeon crawling game set in the dark and grim future of 2712, where you're in control of 4 mercenaries out of pool of available 12. All of them have their own viewpoints and can either be commanded by you or by up to 4 different players all at once on a single system, which I don't have to tell you is an ideal situation and most fun you can squeeze out of this game. Playing it with friends, going through the dungeons and killing baddies. I said light initially, and I meant that the role-playing aspects are rather simplified and focused towards more action-packed gameplay. I didn't mean that Hired Guns is easy. There's plenty of challenge and fun action in it that most would no doubt enjoy its difficulty curve. Your main mission is to destroy all illegal bioengineered creatures on the aptly named planet Graveyard. You can do so by finding and using 4 fusion power core rings in the so-called field core generators, which would cause a controlled thermonuclear explosion. Hired Guns is played in full 3D similar to Eye of the Beholder games, and enemies have complete freedom of movement, meaning that if they want to, they can chase your team throughout the entire game, even changing floor levels as you do. Admittedly, I haven't played Hired Guns as much as I should, and that's on me, but what I saw and read in reviews clearly confirms its cult classic status among the very few that had a chance to experience it in full. It's worth pointing out that the levels are brilliantly designed and the game offers a variety of weapons and other useful items like psionic amplifiers, repair kits, medical packs to name a few, all to suit everyone's gameplay styles in the demanding combat encounters. While Hired Guns is not an easy game, it's a good first title for those who want to have a taste of action role-playing without needing to memorize hundreds of spells or min-maxing their builds to even be viable. And it's definitely worth playing for all fans of dungeon crawling RPGs. Inner Worlds is a shareware game, divided into 3 episodes as these tend to be, and first was available for free, also exactly how shareware games often used to be distributed. In any case, it's a side-scrolling action platformer and one of the most criminally overlooked DOS titles of the mid-90s. I mean, sure, most of us moved to Windows by 1996 when it released, but there were still really fun games dropping for DOS then, and overlooking one as fun as Inner Worlds was definitely a mistake, one that I'm also guilty of. Anyway, you play as a young skimp-dressed woman, Nikita, and she happens to be a werewolf. I would say like in Twilight, but I've never read books nor saw the movies, so I'm not sure if there were any werewolves along with the vampires. But I do have a feeling that they might have been, so... maybe like Twilight, but not necessarily. Oh, I know, like an American werewolf in London, short of the London itself, with woman rather than a man, being said creature and less horror-y. So when I think of it, it's entirely different actually. Oh well. You can jump, climb, crawl, hang on to things that allow hanging from, and change into wolf form whenever squeezing through shorter passages or more oomph to your unarmed attack is necessary. It's worth mentioning that wolf form also has a frenzy attack that literally tears through enemies. As you go through the game, you'll find various pickups, and these can range from different potions refilling health or mana for instance, as well as necklaces that upgrade your health, mana or attack permanently. Weapons such as swords and bows among others can be picked up and used too, and you can even upgrade them with special scrolls that will give them unique abilities. Every episode is composed out of 9 levels, and every 3rd level you get to fight a unique boss. They usually require a bit of different approach and are generally speaking fun to fight against, but they're nothing new, and if you fought end-level bosses in other games, you'll know how to tackle these too. The regular enemies are plenty and quite varied, and represent different animals associated with horror and macabre, like spiders, centipedes and bats, as much as really weird ones like green stretchy armed beasts and even alien-like creatures. First episode sees Nikita traveling towards the castle of Drofanarp, oddly named place indeed, in search for Gralop, even weirder named evil creation of a misguided genius that is supposedly residing in it. In second episode, she learns that Gralop was but one of a duo of monstrosities plaguing the land. And in third, she travels to the mountains where in a volcano the secret of Drofanarp lies. I know, these names are crazy, but think of me. I'm not a native speaker and I have to tongue twist my way around these terrible letter jumbles. Inner World's sound and music design are really well fitting, adding a lot to the eerie mood and grim atmosphere. And the graphics are nicely drawn and smoothly animated, though honestly nothing to write home about in 1996. Overall, it's a fun action game that's worth completing even today. How did you enjoy today's 10? I tried covering various genres so that everyone could find something for themselves between them. DOS was and is a bottomless well of little known games, and most of them are interesting for a variety of reasons. Good or bad, they all had something worth remembering for. Hence why we're here. Abaron is a top-down vertically scrolling shoot-em-up, and I have mixed feelings about it, but we'll circle back to the issues I have with it later. Story-wise, after 300 years in exile, humanity finally comes back to Earth to reclaim it from the aliens that took it over in the past war. Our fleet may not be big, but our spirits are high, especially that you're the one we're sending back to defeat the alien scum and regain control of our homeworld. And you never failed before. On the first glance, Abaron is your everyday shooter. No different than anything else you've tried in the genre, but there are also some small notable differences. For one, it only gives you 1 life and offers no continues. So what you see is what you get, and if you die for good. But you can save between the levels, so you don't really have to restart the game from the beginning each time you play. Then there are weapons, which are purchased for credits collected from special defeated enemies. Nothing new here. But each has a different cost, and if you have more than one purchased, you can switch between them. Also, nothing out of ordinary. Some of them can even be upgraded by buying them more than once. Keep in mind, however, that credits cannot be hoarded, because if you have 10 and pick another, the counter will reset to 0 and you will be rewarded extra points for the high score. Which is fine when your ship is all geared up, but could be disappointing if you didn't manage to arm yourself as well as you hope you would, and see them go quote-unquote to waste. All of that while novel is generally speaking okay and something to get used to. But what I don't enjoy about Aberon whatsoever is that some of your shots are so small and bluntly colored that it's difficult to distinguish them from the background at times. I mean, sure, it's not the end of the world, as it's enemies' shots that are the most important for you to notice to survive, but I like to have that visual feedback to fully control the on-screen action, you know? Fortunately, I'm me and you're you, and it's you who's going to save the Earth. So if you don't mind this little nuisance, you should really give Aberon a try. What is wonton? It's what the scales show when your mama stands on it. Bazinga. I know, cringe, I'm sorry, but that's the extent of the jokes that you can expect from me. Anyway, wonton is also a tiny arcade action freeware title, and when I say tiny, I mean it. It's just like a dozen kilobytes or something. You could fit hundreds of copies of it on a single floppy. I don't know why you'd do that, but you could. It's also not a game that will keep you entertained for hours on end, as it's proportionally captivating to its size. So 2-3 minutes tops is what I'd expect to take out from it if I were you. In wonton, you're strong. Strong enough to lift wonton and wield it as if it weighed nothing. And your goal is to crush as many people in one go as you can with your wonton weight, creating puddles of undisclosed red liquid everywhere. It's definitely not blood though, it's jam, I think. Anyway, the button/plunger on the right summons a human when you press it, so preferably do it quite a few times to fill the screen, and then you get to crush them. And that's it really. No scores, no thank yous, no game overs, nothing. Just you and the little folks and a sea worth of jam. Like I said initially, 2-3 minutes is what it's worth. Around as much as I spent covering it here. So, if you happen to come across wonton, give it a go, for shits and giggles, but if you don't have it, I wouldn't recommend wasting your time searching for it. Black Zone is a sci-fi futuristic action-adventure platformer. There once was a town like all others, thriving, full of life and peaceful. And then came the aliens. A story you've heard on this channel more than once today. First, the alien ship hovered over said town menacingly, covering it in its gloomy shadow, then the streets filled with alien machines moving about in an unknown purpose, and finally, as fast as they appeared, aliens left, leaving empty husk of a town behind. Quiet, desolate and eerie. Expeditions were sent to it to figure out what happened and what changed, but none ever came back, leaving more questions than answers. Eventually the town was left as it stood, decaying and forgotten. But when the army and science fails, what do we do? When all means of study and examination bring no results, what do we do? And when no one comes back from a mission of questionable success chances, who do we call for? You, that's who. So, you'll go into the titular Black Zone, the area where the desolated city stands is called, and we'll try to uncover the secrets of inhabitants' disappearances. Black Zone is a flick screen platformer with adventuring elements. To complete the game you will have to reprogram the machines that's in the city using omnipresent control panels to modify their behavior, so to open barriers, move platforms and such. You will also encounter various anomalies like odd harmless alien creatures wandering about, spatial warps, gravity manipulating machines and others. It's a game of puzzling and exploration at heart, and as such there will be no real enemies for you to defeat. You're here to learn what happened and reopen the city for entry. Even though Black Zone is only using EGA presentation, it looks pretty nice for what the chip was capable, and you're never really feeling as if the graphics were taking you out of the experience. Same can't be said about the sounds and music though. First is sparse and not great, the latter is okay but a bit slow, better suited to putting you to sleep than being played in a background of a video game. It would work great in an elevator is what I'm saying. All in all, Black Zone is not a bad game, but it's definitely not for everyone. Slower paced gameplay and lack of action may not be fun for many, so approach it only if it looks and sounds like something you'd enjoy. Kingdom of Sorinor is at constant unrest. 6 clans have been fighting with each other for control for years. Wars are expensive, however, both in terms of supplies and men, so now they mostly use mercenaries, hiring them to ambush and assassinate high-ranking members of opposing clans and protect their own. You are leader of one of such mercenary bands. I mean, you may be an accountant, administrative clerk, subway employee or even a mall Santa, I have no way of knowing, but in the game you lead a group of deadly sellswords, completing series of offensive and defensive missions. I should say battles really and not missions, so yeah, battles. So, before each encounter you hire mercenaries, which may come from all fantasy staple races like orcs, dwarves, humans or even humorous races that you won't get to see in any other game, like defense lawyers. And yeah, I shit you not. All of them have their own statistics, skills and abilities and cost money in upkeep. And since you're working within a budget for each battle, you have to compose the best mix for anything and everything that you may face when it starts. When all that's done, brew a cup of hot Earl Grey tea and send your men onto the battlefield. Battles take place in real time and you can control your units around the map, sending them to strategic or engaged in combat locations. You can also issue more direct commands of waiting, attacking or ambushing among others, but these can only be used on groups and not individual units. If you're a regular of my channel, Ambush at Sorinor may seem like something you've seen before. And you're not wrong. We've spoke about a little game called Siege in one of the last episodes of 10 years of early Windows gaming. Ambush at Sorinor was made by the same developer, Minecraft Software, and shares many common gameplay mechanics with Siege. So if you like that one, this one's definitely something you should track down and play. It's worth pointing out that if you do enjoy it, Ambush at Sorinor includes a built-in map and scenario editor, prolonging its stay considerably. RC2 is a top-down single-screen puzzler in which you control a smiley face and have to use it to puzzle your way to the exit of each of the numerous increasingly more demanding stages. To complete the level you have to collect all keys and then reach the exit. It's not as straightforward as it sounds though, and each stage features obstacles. Some are animated while others are static. Those that move usually follow predictable patterns, so they can either go straight and turn 90 degrees right every time they reach something that stops them in their way, or there are those that actively go straight ahead towards the smiley face as soon as it gets in their sight. Some are not aggressive per se and just multiply, blocking the passages if left with an open space next to them. There's more obviously, but listing them all here would serve no purpose and would rob you of sense of discovery when you encounter them first. Static obstacles are likes of stones, walls, water and laser cannons among others. There are also one-way passages, but they're hardly obstacles, more like an element to the puzzling to figure out when to use in the correct moment. There's no time limit in RC2 and you can save your game anywhere, though upon loading you start the particular level from the very beginning. RC2 is perhaps not the best puzzler out there, but it's utterly enjoyable, especially in those more demanding stages. Despite looking like something that I could come up with graphically after downing a bottle of wild turkey on shrooms, it's definitely worth your time if you like games that will keep your noggin working in an overdrive. I'm Batman! What? No, I'm not advocating use of any substances. It was just an example, Bruce. Chill, man. Armada 2525 is a 4X turn-based sci-fi space strategy. 4X standing for extra, excellent, extremely exquisite. And that's you, my dear viewer. 4X. Armada is easily one of the best games of its kind for its time on PC, the time being 1991. There's no real story to it of any kind, it's 2525, we're just starting space colonization and you're in charge to lead us through it. Even more so, there's no tasks, winning conditions of any kind other than either preset turn limit, which can be turned off, or your typical for the 4X genre conditions. And you can play in a maximum 6-player multiplayer in any combination of human and CPU players as long as there's at least one person involved. So you'll be exploring unknown galaxies, expanding your sphere of influence by setting new colonies and capturing planets. You'll exploit said planets for resources and exterminate other races so that yours could be the only one. Wow, that actually sounds terrible and like the history that shouldn't have ever repeat. Anyway, as you go about doing that, you'll obviously need to research technologies, eventually allowing you to customize your space fleets with around 20 different models of ships and your colonies with approximately 15 kinds of buildings. The research is divided into 8 separate disciplines of weapons, construction, hyperspace, force fields, biotech, planetology, infoscience and esoterically sounding psychoscience. And it's worth planning a little ahead to what you aim to get to. Combat encounters give you a certain amount of control, though you can't affect singular units and can only set formations and issue general orders. Armada 2525 sounds great, right? And you probably wonder why you've never heard of it. Well, it's not without its issues. Mainly there's no real diplomacy in the game whatsoever. You can start a war by attacking other races, but that's pretty much it, there's nothing else that you could do. And CPU has one extra option of asking for peace, which is not available to you. There's nothing else, which not only makes the game feel a bit lacking in this important department, but also pretty much makes arms race necessary from the get-go, as you have no way of guaranteeing peace in any other way. It's not a game-breaking fault in any shape or form, but it's a big omission in Armada's design, no doubt about that. So, while I have no way of confirming or denying it, I attribute this to be a part of the reason of game's obscurity. Aspitra is a top-down turn-based RPG conceptually similar to Final Fantasy, in which you control a single hero rather than a party of adventurers. The game starts with you being apprehended by the local law enforcement when you emerge from a magical cloud. Your claims of being sent by the mage LD Root fall on deaf ears, and as you're just about to face the consequences, the nearby village is attacked. When you get to it, you learn that the village elder was kidnapped, and being the do-gooder that you are, you volunteer to rescue him. And that's how your epic adventure begins. Much of your time in Aspitra will be spent traveling a rather large world, conversing with various characters, taking and completing quests, and fighting enemies, mainly, but not limited to, from random encounters. Up to 5 of these can attack you at once and you have to deal with them alone. Because All By Myself is a song to which words you live by, supposedly. Anyway, in combat you can straight up fight using your equipped weapon, use items from your inventory and cast magic spells, which you will learn as the game progresses and they're not available to you from the very start. Upon victory, you receive your rewards in the form of coins, experience points and a level up when appropriate. Level up also heals you and improves your stats in a typical for RPG's progression. Oh, and I lied, but not really, only a little. If you want to define a small lie a lie anyway, then I lied. But if you give me a little leeway and agree that small lie is not a lie but just an omission of truth, then I didn't. Whatever. What I'm trying to say here is that I initially said that the combat's turn-based, which is true to some degree. It is, unless you wait long during your turn, then it will resume automatically pushing enemy turns before yours. So yeah, it's turn-based, but not really. You can obviously equip armors and weapons, visit towns, inns and shops and do everything you would have done in any other RPG. So if you're into JRPG offshoot of RPGs, you'll love it. Blinky 2 is a mediocre action-adventure title that was made using the Game Maker software, I think. It's a toolkit designed to, yeah, you guessed it right, make games. Now, if there ever was a terrible title screen to game, Blinky 2 is the one. I mean, just look at this monstrosity. It looks like something a 7-year-old came up with on a sugar high just before inevitably crashing on a shopping bag full of candy. Anyway, the villain of the previous game, Schnookwot, unleashed a sea worth of monsters upon otherwise peaceful funky forest, purple protagonist Blinky lived. Now, that's not something you do to a man's home, or dinos in this particular case, so Blinky grabbed a box of his favorite chocolate-covered donuts and set off to defeat the villain. To do so, however, he has to go through 16 candy-colored levels and defeat 4 even more colorful bosses. All levels are rather large and presented in this odd top-down sorta Zelda-like perspective. Which is not bad, as it allows for injection of some basic height differential to stage's design, but doesn't save the game from the awful terrible scrolling that it suffers from. In fact, I dislike Blinky 2 a lot, just because how the game feels in movement. It's tiring to me and makes my head hurt, and it's something that shouldn't have happened in 1994. On the flip side, it may be down to games maker's limitations, so perhaps I should not be so sour talking about it. So, the environments are quite varied and interesting, ranging from forests and waterfalls through swamps all the way to the dungeons. All uniquely looking and featuring various different obstacles and enemies alike, which, as you can imagine, are all out to get you. But you did not take those donuts with you for no reason, and you projectile throw them at anything and everything, clearing a path towards victory. I don't really like Blinky, but objectively speaking, other than the scrolling, there's nothing really wrong with the game. So if you enjoyed those simple action-adventure titles, it may be worth your time. Oh, and Blinky 2 was never released commercially. It's a free game, so it has that going for it. "1989's Barbarian is a port of a 2-year-older Amiga original, and it's a living proof that PC's EGA cards could not compare to what Amiga's chipset was capable of, and that the VGA was the step in the right direction. Anyway, you play as Hegor, a buff protein powder muncher who's on an epic quest to find and defeat the evil wizard Necron, who's coincidentally easier than some of the enemies that we'll meet along the way. But I digress. Barbarian is a side-scrolling action-adventure and a protoplast to the whole Souls-like genre. I realize that I've made enemies now among you guys, but I said it, I meant it, and I've Batman here to protect me. And he will actually reply to all the negative comments with snarky ones of his own, and it will be things like "I'm Batman" or "I'm Batman" or even "I'm Batman" if he gets really pissed off. So, why did I compare it to a genre so beloved that it created a magical aura of hate around itself, actively reflecting any negative comments thrown at it? Well, because it kinda is one. I mean, it features enemies that have very unique to them attack and behavior patterns, environmental dangers to which you have to react quickly not to die, and you do it by mastering the controls, to the point that you have to time your reactions to the enemy's actions to be able to complete the game. The thing is, while I said that Barbarian is an action game and I stand by it, it's not your typical one. You don't have direct control of Hegor, but use his available moves and attacks, be it with a sword or bow, by clicking on series of buttons at the bottom of the screen. I feel that it's a terrible choice as it demands your full attention and perfect timing. So exactly what Souls-like games do, at which I suck beyond belief, I must add. Is Barbarian something that you should try? Well, depends how you feel playing frustrating and incredibly challenging games, that are actually not really bad whatsoever. Just very difficult, more than they really had to be. Baron Baldric: A Grave Adventure is the most obscure title in this whole video, everywhere outside of Australia, because it's the only region in which it was released as a full version. Its shareware offshoot subtitled A Grave Overture as opposed to A Grave Adventure reached other regions in a limited manner as far as I know, but don't quote me on that. It's a side-view platform adventure not unlike in its gameplay mechanics to Impossible Mission 2 or Montezuma's Revenge, but different in theme. You obviously play as the titular Baron Baldric, who is painstakingly animated, I must add, and that's not a given in games that started off as shareware and you have to search for your late family's treasure in the tombs under the castle Pidabauch. Your ancestor, Baron Lazarus Pidabauch, used to live there centuries ago, and his maniacal studies of the so-called wolf magic twisted his mind, turning him into a cruel tyrant and a local villain. So, you'll be traveling the castle and its dungeons, collecting treasures, avoiding the enemies and environmental dangers, all the while making sure to eat, as an adventure of this grandiose scale can easily leave a man craving for some nom-noms. After all, who could say no to a chicken, a burger or even some grapes just lying around the castle floor for God knows how long? I mean, the 10-second rule applies, right? But it's reversed here. If it's been there for more than 10 seconds, preferably a decade or two, then it's good to go. To eat, I mean. Game logic. Anyway, castles filled with various hidden switches, turning platforms and ladders on in least expected places, so make sure to touch all the walls at any time you feel like you've reached a dead end or see a platform with no obvious way of getting to. It's a neat concept, but that overused in my opinion. Baron Baldric feels to me like an 8-bit game that was granted an early 16-bit design. Is that bad? Not really, it's just not something I would be going out of my way to find and play. By 1993, when it released, it was already looking dated on the platform it dropped on and felt like something even older when played. And that, along with limited area of promotion, contributed to its rare status today. Battlesport is a futuristic sports game that originally came out on 3DO and then was ported to other systems, Windows being one of them. And conceptually it's very simple, you face the opponent and it's down to which of you scores most goals before the time runs out, all in 3D FPS gameplay style. The ball bounces around the arena, so you have to get to it first, grab it and then move it to the area from which you could score, all the while avoiding opponents and their fire. And it's not easy, as there's quite a few weapons that they can use against you, well, you can use them too if opponents hold the ball. If a player carrying the ball is shot, he loses possession, sending the ball in the direction he was going when hit. The ships can be destroyed, which forbids them from taking part in the match for a little while, giving the opponent time to score some more goals. So, combat is as important as the goals themselves are. The more matches you win, the higher your standing in the rankings will be and the more cash you will bring in, allowing you to invest in better vehicle and upgrade its defensive and offensive capabilities. Very often when the game is available on few different platforms, there's one that features best presentation, gameplay or sound design. And while Battlesport varied between those that it came out on, it shared the same addictive gameplay on all of them and was really fun. Especially in split-screen 2-player mode, where you get to telegraph your unquestionable superiority over your soon-to-be ex-friends. "1991's Battlestorm is a port from Amiga and an always scrolling shoot 'em up. After years of traveling and exploring the space, you finally came back home to Earth to find it invaded by the aggressive alien forces. Now, you're you, and it's not your first interstellar rodeo, so naturally you jump into best state-of-the-art and most heavily armed craft that you have and vouch to eradicate the invaders. As video game stories go, this one's not the best, but Battlestorm is a shooter, so who cares? The game is composed out of 4 levels, each divided into 2 smaller sub-stages. And you'll get to fight and destroy various air and ground enemies before taking on titular Battlestorm, alien headquarters and their guardians. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Battlestorm is demanding, and when I say so, I'm not throwing these words in the air. It really is. So if I could suggest something, it would be starting at the lower side of the difficulty, so that you get time to accustom to how it plays before moving to the more demanding choices. Interestingly enough, not all stages are always scrolling, some are horizontal only, while others move in vertical fashion. It may seem odd at first, but it adds a lot of the variety, and there's no such thing as too much variety in gaming. The game is difficult, we've established that already, so to combat the odds criminally stacked against you, you have pickups. And these are many. From stronger lasers to homing missiles, with others like fire rate and movement speed mixed for good measure. Always pick them up if you get a chance. Don't think you'll come back for one cause you just need to dispose of that group of enemies that's been bothering you or whatever. If you know where a pickup is, and you will, as the pop-up messages will let you know, go and get it. They will be crucial for your survival. And Earth's future too. It's not all great though. I mean, gameplay-wise it's all fine, but the porting is of questionable quality. On Amiga, Battlestorm used 32 colors and they were everywhere. On your craft, on enemies and in the backgrounds. It looked great. And on PC, even though using VGA capable of 256 colors at once, the game looks blunt and monochromatic. I'm not sure what happened there during porting, but it's disappointing to say the least. The Big Three, named after three leaders opposing the Axis in the World War II, so Joseph Stalin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, is an excellent example of a saying that good things come in small packages come true. Its CGI graphics are beyond dated, even for 1989, the sound and music are virtually non-existent, and it doesn't feel like a lot of money went to its creation. Hence why it's in this video, I feel. But that's neither here nor there. It screams budget or even garage release. And yet, despite all that, it's a good World War II game, and a fun title for connoisseurs of the genre. It's played on a hexagonal grid and features many different kinds of units, air, ground and naval. All of them have to be built first, before they can be deployed, and you even have to secure supply chains for them, adding a lot to the realism of simulation. CPU opponent is surprisingly competent and challenging, and will often keep you at the edge of your seat trying to figure out how to overcome its offensive. Shareware version features 3 scenarios taking place on different fronts: Western, Eastern and Mediterranean during different stages of the war. And full registered copy featured 3 more scenarios and an additional one covering a whole conflict, the so-called Total War. Big 3 looks terrible, using the worst of all CGI palettes, and there's no way going around it. But it more than makes up for it with gameplay and depth that you'd not expect from a shareware release. Would I recommend playing it today? Honestly, I wouldn't. And not because it's lacking in the strategy department, because it's not. It's competent actually, at least for 1989. But there are just decades of better games to pick from today. So playing one as old and awful looking as Big 3 is just unnecessary. Blupo is a new take on a classic Boulder Dash formula. You play as Teacher-Lab Blupo, a chef extraordinaire, food lover and most of all, entrepreneur wannabe. One day his distant relative promises him a restaurant of his own if Blupo manages to cook him a special meal. A meal to prove that cooking is a career for our little Blupo. So he finds a unique recipe that requires sweat of 3000 rare fish. Totally ignoring the fact that fish don't sweat, Blupo puts on his scuba gear and sets off underwater to collect the fish. I know, the story is super silly, but the gameplay is fun, so it's not a big deal. The game is basically underwater Boulder Dash in which you complete 60 increasingly difficult single-player stages collecting orange fish, avoiding the yellow ones and taking care not to die. All the usual Boulder Dash tropes apply here too, so you gotta make sure not to have rocks fall on you, mind the exploding fish and not to lock yourself out of the exit. Not all creatures are nasties though, and some levels feature friendly fish that will eat the evil ones if given a chance. So there's that small bit of strategy added to all the puzzling too. All levels are timed and it's represented by the oxygen that Blupo has left in his tanks. He can pick up spare oxygen bottles along the way though to extend timer a little. Interestingly enough, other than the single player levels, Blupo also features another 62 player stages that you can play together with a friend. And they're as fun, if not more fun, even than the single player. Well, unless you're gaming with someone who doesn't grasp the simple concept of Boulder Dash and keeps locking you out of the exit, then it's a nightmare. Bubble Pop is fun. The end. Let me try again. I'm a bit tired and not 100%. So, Bubble Pop is a fun 1 or 2 player arcade platformer not identical but similar to Bubble Bobble. The so-called evil one has turned all your animal friends evil and against you and captured your love, Bublina. Now, first things first. I think it's about time we should stop calling villains in games the evil one, as I'm sure that with extra 5 minutes of creative thinking anyone can come up with a better name. I mean, was the evil 2 already taken? I'm Batman! Yeah, you're right buddy, Joker and Penguin are underused in video games and are better names too. See, even Manbat needs no more than few seconds to think of something way more creative. Anyway, armed with nothing more than your magic wand, you venture through 5 huge worlds of little over 100 single-screen levels to fulfill your epic quest. Each of the worlds is uniquely designed and features appropriate thematically enemies and decorations. They are Toy World, Water World, Hell World, Snow World and Blob World, whatever that means. All of them end with an epic boss fight and they're all super fun to go through, especially with a friend at your side. Animals zapped with your wand turn into fruit and other bonus items and die. So if you think of it, you're going through 5 cartoon worlds committing genocide. And given how colorful the game and its inhabitants are, you're kinda the evil one here. Think about it. Anyway, the wand you start with can be exchanged into 4 more powerful weapons, so with time you'll be able to spread death and destruction more efficiently, and 20 different kinds of creatures that you get to meet will all fear your name. You will become their boogeyman that they will tell tales of to their kids, their Baba Yaga, their John Wick. Or Bubble Week, I should say, really, as it seems more appropriate. Bubble Pop features 20 hidden levels, and finding them all will guarantee extra points for the high score table and adds a lot to the replayability. So, we're back to where I started. Bubble Pop is fun and even better with a friend. Should you play it? Definitely, it's likely to be the best multiplayer title in this video. Bashback Global Treasure Hunter is an epic and really cool sounding name for otherwise disappointing game. Because no matter how incredibly great sounding words you'll use to describe a dog poop, it will still remain a dog poop, and can never be anything else. While Bashback may not be as bad, it's an educational game and these hardly ever are very fun. Oh well, let's take a look at this one. You're Bashback, and you're going to fly around the world to find and secure world's most important treasures before the nefarious Otto von Slinkenrad pockets them for himself. On a side note, Otto von Slinkenrad is a much better villain name than the evil one we saw in the previous game. So, you'll be traveling between 206 cities in 175 countries searching for clues for said treasures. On each visit you'll learn new local factoids and curiosities that may help you. In essence, Bashback is a game of hot and cold where you travel around the world gathering vague clues that work kinda like hot and cold does. So yeah, hints like it's an European country or it's not in the southern hemisphere is what you'll be finding most of the time. It's not a terrible concept, but it stays questionable, and unless you're a geography buff, it's not very fun either. It's a bit more enjoyable if you play with someone else, but only if you both have similar grasp on geography, cause otherwise it will be a one-sided game each time, and that gets old fast. At each game start, computer will select 15 random treasures out of built-in 400 and will issue a set number of tickets to both players. Each flight obviously consumes 1 ticket, and the game ends either when all artifacts are found or when both players run out of tickets. When that happens, points are summed up and compared between the players, and the winner is chosen. And that's it, the whole game. And while I'm a huge fan of various quizzes and quiz-like games, Bashback's focus on geography alone is its single biggest problem. Because like I pointed out before, it requires players to have similar knowledge in the subject. If they don't, one's bound to grow tired of it. While in regular quiz games, both players have disciplines in which they're more knowledgeable, so lack of that balancing limits potential fun factor and playability of Bashback considerably. Celtic Tales Balor of the Evil Eye is an isometric turn-based strategy empire building game with some role-playing elements. Evil Balor and his armies of Formors are the scourge of the Ireland. Neither of the tribes is strong enough to stand against them and free the country. But if they were to unite under one High King and join forces, they could stand a chance to overcome Balor and his forces. So, you must pick one of 9 champions and work your way to better your clan, unite others with it under one banner and free your homeland. It's clear from the get-go that the developers did their homework, as the attention to historical detail is staggering. But it's not without the touch of fantasy that we all like. The game itself is based off of 4 cornerstones. 4 pillars of fun is what I'd like to call them. First being your clan development, so you'll need to make sure to build farms, herd animals, mine for ores and chop for wood. Not by yourself obviously, but you get what I mean. Second is your hero and character, which is the role-playing part I mentioned initially. So this is the avatar that you play as, and you have to make sure that he will develop useful skills and progress. You do so by assigning him to specific tasks. Keep in mind that out of 3 classes of warrior, bard and druid, only the latter 2 are capable of learning and using spells. Then there's diplomacy, which as the name suggests is used for contacts with other tribes. You can wage war, form alliances, trade, send caravans and create unique items. And finally, war. How is that a cornerstone for winning a game, you may wonder, especially one about uniting forces to defeat the evil? Well, while all 4 are important, in reality you can ignore the other 3 and just force your way through the game, waging wars, uniting the factions by conquest and finally defeating the evil. It's not easy, but it's possible. Celtic Tales is a unique blend of strategy, management and role-playing, and if played as developers intended, it's a lot of fun and very detailed title that will no doubt be one you'll remember fondly. If chased through combat though, while not easy to pull off, loses a bit of its appeal. Champion of the Raj is a turn-based strategy with arcade elements. The game revolves around European imperialism and colonialism in India, with 6 factions competing over the control of the country: British, French, Mughal Empire, Sikhs, Gurkhas and Marathas. At least 3 of these I've butchered pronunciation of here beyond recognition, I'm sure. The main fare of the game takes place on a strategic map where players aim to conquer all the territories of India. either via combat or peaceful diplomatic means. Combat is self-explanatory, but diplomatic takeover is only possible if a player has high enough influence in the region. He is then invited to either take part in elephant race or tiger hunting sessions. Success in either will guarantee uniting the region under player's faction. If only all conflicts around the real world could be resolved like that, it would be a dream. Maybe short of shooting the tigers, as these are endangered. Anyway, those arcade sequences are also presented after other notable events such as capturing of the palace of the enemy, for instance. All territories that you control bring you money in taxes, which is great and can be used to better your faction, spending them on necessities or to hire or upgrade armies. Fun stuff. All factions differ in their characteristics and units quite considerably, so each will require entirely different strategy to succeed. The graphics are pretty nice in Champion of the Rush 2, they're rather colorful and very stylish. It's one of those games that you would not think you'd enjoy until you actually start playing, but if given enough time, it rewards players with fun and unique challenge. Champions of Zulala Elite Edition is a very unusual take on the versus fighting genre and an expanded version of year prior's first game. It features 24 different fighters, cause I can't really call them characters as some of them are not humanoids, different bosses and multiple gameplay modes. Zulala is a town in the mystical land of Akistar that is not known for its monuments, food or even tourist hotspots, not the case here whatsoever. It is however hosting famous martial tournaments, and that fame spread around the world like a wildfire, sparking interest in hearts of any and all fighters of all kinds, human or otherwise. All that crave validation of being the best make their way to the city where they will fight in a tournament to find the one. At the game start you have to create your character picking between many races, and the game uses the word race quite liberally, as much as a troll or mud golem can be considered a race, a thief or warlock really aren't. But I'm splitting hair here, point is you create a character and pick who/what he is. The game can hold many of these at the time and keeps detailed statistics for all of them. There's 4 main gameplay modes to choose from and they are single fight, which is kinda self-explanatory. You pick a fighter and then opponent for him that will be CPU controlled and then you fight him. Then there's the elimination tournament, which is basically a standard tournament where from each battle only one fighter goes ahead until only 2 end in the final battle. There's also a so-called 20 monsters bash, which drops 4 different enemies on the screen at once and they all fight each other at once. Whenever any of them dies, a new one jumps into the fight until all are gone and only one lives in a Christopher Lambert's Highlander style, meaning that there can be only one. And finally, there's the Challenge the Evil Lord mode, which kinda explains itself too. Basically, it's like single fight, but against the game's bosses. Fighting mechanics of Champions of Zulala are simplistic, primitive even, featuring a couple of attack types for each fighter, jump and block. Nothing more. No explosive specials or finishes. You could say that it makes the game boring and short stay, and I get that, but it's fun for how unique it is, even if it doesn't offer the same replayability as other giants of the genre do. Believe it or not, but the last game for today is also a versus fighter. It's more classic in its design though and follows the true and tried formula, rather than inventing anything particularly unique or unusual. After years of bloody intergalactic wars, a fragile peace was formed between all the cosmic races. To sustain it and to keep the aggressive temperaments in check, an annual tournament is announced, so that all the former enemy races can send their best warriors to compete for the prestigious title of the Hero of the Universe. There's one thing I gotta know here. If the tournament is annual and all fighters come from different planets in different solar systems with different lengths of days and years, how do we pick which year is the year for the tournament? Is it Earth's or some other planets? Well, we will never know, but it's interesting to think about nonetheless. All fighters are appropriately different, representing their planets of origin. Each of them fights in a unique style and features different moves and special attacks, ranged or otherwise. Violent Vengeance can be played in standard 2-player versus mode or single-player tournament, where you go through series of fighters that culminate with epic boss fights. These bosses are more extraordinary than the tournament participants and obviously pose bigger challenge to beat. The presentation is pretty decent overall, sound design is good, and all the attacks, shouts and grunts you'd expect from a box standard fighter are here and are well telegraphed. Graphics are colorful with decently large sprites and interesting design. Same can be said about backgrounds, which are lush and even feature some basic animated elements here and there. What could be improved though is the fighters' animations that feel like they could use 3-4 frames more for each attack to feel fluid and less jumpy. I mean, it's not terrible, but it lacks that extra final touch to be more than just average. As it stands, it's just that. Middle of the road in the genre. Not great, not terrible, somewhere in between, forgotten by time. Seven Colors is a rather good one or two player top-down turn-based puzzle strategy mixture. All that said, personally I don't find it very fun when played against the CPU. It's so much better against another player. The game is played on a rectangular board filled with diamonds in 7 different colors. Players start at opposing sides of the game board and take turns picking colors. Whenever one is chosen, all the other diamonds of the same color bordering with player's territory are annexed, expanding his or her borders. And I'm sure that's enough for you to figure out what the objective is, right? Yep, you're right as usual, whoever controls more than half of the game board wins. But that's not all of it. There are some tactical quirks here and there that may turn the tide of the competition at any moment. For one, any color that one of the players picks is locked for choosing for another one for a whole turn, meaning it's sometimes best to block rather than attack, metaphorically speaking. Additionally, creating a line from one border of the board to another fills the space between them entirely. And finally, boards are randomized at start, coming with diamonds of various sizes and henceforth equally as varying strategic importance. There are also obstacle stones on the board, and they serve no other function than being annoying roadblocks. But since they're neutral, they are as annoying to your opponent as they are to you. Seven Colors is pretty fun with another player, especially that it includes a board editor, which means that there's some potential for tournament play between like-minded gamers. But against CPU, it's forgettable at best and pointless at worst. Deathbringer is a side-view action-adventure beat-em-up mixture. But first things first, the League of Wizards, awesome name I must add, so a group of evil wizards, forged a magical sword imbuing a demon's soul to it. They name it the Deathbringer. And they aim to use it to kill Karn the Barbarian, our protagonist. He, however, takes the sword for himself and plans to use it against its creators. The sword holding the demon's soul requires to be constantly fed, for the lack of a better word, to hold the demon within it. So, on your quest to find and kill the evil wizards, you need to kill monsters to keep the sword content and powerful. Deathbringer is composed out of 30 non-linear side-scrolling levels in which you unusually start in the very middle of, and can move both left and right freely and progress in a chosen direction. Defeating enemies and getting to the end allows Karn to fight the boss guarding the next stage. Saying that there's 30 levels is a bit of a misdirection, as they all are interconnected in multiple spots, letting you move between them. Overall, there's apparently over 600 screens in the game. That kind of sizing in a game other than top-down role-playing means nothing to me, however, and I cannot fathom how big it really is. Is it single screens? Or a singular side-scrolling sections? I don't know. Do you? It's big. Whatever. Anyway, there's no literal time limit to how long you have to complete the game other than having to kill the monsters and refill the sword. As if at any point sword fill meter empties, Karn will die. Deathbringer was originally developed for the Amiga and on the Amiga, and that's why it may look like something familiar to you if you had the system before and also carried that Amiga-like graphical design. Interestingly enough, one more thing transferred successfully from Amiga to PC, and looks stunning for the time, and its 36-level parallax scrolling background, which is fantastic. It was achieved using wedges instead of squares as tiles for it. It may not be as smooth on PC as it is on the Amiga, but it looks jaw-dropping. Arguably, Deathbringer's gameplay loop is not for everyone, but if you are such a person, you'll have a lot of fun. Cloud Kingdoms is a top-down action puzzler. But wait, it has a story. Evil Baron von Bonsai has stolen your collection of precious crystals, scattered them around 32 different kingdoms and left you to your own devices. Now, why was that story needed? I don't know, but it's there. And you, as Terrid, have to travel through the game trying to recover the crystals. Interestingly enough, Cloud Kingdoms doesn't use lives mechanic, so you can't lose by dying. Instead, it gives you approximately 400 seconds to complete the entire game. And each level you pass successfully supplements the counter with additional 80. If that was all, then Cloud Kingdoms wouldn't be too demanding and the 400 seconds would be more than enough. So, obviously there are numerous bodies and environmental dangers in your way. Enemies you gotta avoid, so that's that. But the hazards, oh my, there's so many. I mean, there are holes in the ground, and not all are visible at first. There are slippery squares, magnetic ones keeping you glued to them and unable to jump from, keys you have to find to open locked-off sections. There's a lot. Fortunately, you don't have to complete all 32 levels to quote-unquote win. The game is divided into 8 sections of few levels each in non-linear fashion, and you only have to complete 8 levels overall, picking one from each section. So, first 2 sections give you choice of 4 levels each. The next 2 only offer 3, 5th and 6th give you 2 to pick between, and the last couple have 1 stage each, so you have to go through them as they come. It's not entirely random, and you have some influence on what comes next, as the choices you are given are the leftovers from your earlier picks. So there's that. Every world is unique, featuring special blocks and enemies, so Cloud Kingdoms offers quite a decent degree of replayability. If there's one thing I feel that is missing from Cloud Kingdoms, it's VGA support, as it would have looked much better in high color mode. Clyde's Adventure is an unusual shareware platformer. Unusual because it doesn't feature any enemies. And I mean it, there's not a single one in the entire game. And it doesn't matter, as it's pretty decent without them too. It's divided into 32 levels, split in 2 packs. First 16 available for free in the shareware version, and additional 16 unlocked with a purchase. To complete the stage and move to the next, you have to find and pick up all the treasures and gems in it. It's not as easy as it seems, as the levels are filled with environmental dangers, and touching grand majority of them kills Clyde instantly, so learning how to measure and time your jumps is crucial. Additionally, Clyde has an energy meter that's depleting as he walks, jumps and falls, so picking a correct route in those more demanding stages is a must. If you do learn them by heart, however, most levels are a breeze and shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes to complete. Interestingly enough, stages are unlocked in freeze, so if any in particular is too demanding for you, you can skip it, go through the others and come back to it later on with a fresh head. Now, I have beef with few design choices. Clyde's Adventure is not an easy game, and it's unlikely that you'll complete any levels other than the first few on a first go, and we'll have to not only learn the layout of them, but also all dangers and how to avoid them. It's part of the fun, but I would prefer a bit more forgiving difficulty curve, to be honest. What I have the biggest gripe with is the scrolling and animation though. Saying that it's jerky is an understatement. It's painful to watch for longer periods of time, at least to me, and I would suggest taking in the game in parts in between other titles. But it may be me, and it doesn't have to be an issue for others. I, however, have to make sure that some of those modern FPS titles run at least 60 FPS, cause otherwise, after a while, it becomes physically uncomfortable for me. Come to think of it, now that I said it aloud, it seems like a neurological issue. Oh well, whatever, it's a problem for another day. Clyde's Adventure is both fun and annoying, depends where on the Souls-like spectrum you find yourself on a particular day. But if it sounds like something you'd like, give it a go. It's a decent little game. Fistfight is a side-scrolling beat-em-up for 1 or 2 players. You can play as Dude, Ryu from Street Fighter lookalike, or a blonde girl. And for whatever the reason, they both keep pushing right, beating up hundreds upon hundreds of bodies. I'm not sure if there's any story to Fistfight, but there definitely is a full screen rotation with scrolling in the menu that's a vomit-inducing nightmare. And not because it's badly made, technically it's actually pretty impressive. It's because its frame rate is so slow that it's painful. But since we're on a speed, Fistfight itself doesn't know how fast it wants to run. It feels slow and fast at the same time. And get that, it also plays slow and fast at the same time. When there's nothing on the screen other than your character or characters if you're torturing someone else with this game too, their other standing animations have just 2 states, so by extension of that, 2 frames. And they cycle between both constantly, which makes them look as if the game would run way too fast. On the flip side, when there's more than one enemy on the screen or some animated background objects, the game slows down to a near crawl. It's terrible. The Ryu-looking dude's moves seem to be carbon copy of his counterpart from Street Fighter 2, but the girl at least feels as if she was originally designed for the game. Pity, she's no fun to play. Scratch that. They both suck equally. The game features regular and special attacks and screen-clearing quote-unquote bombs. The enemies are generic and uninspired, and each of 7 levels ends with a boss fight. Graphics, other than the backgrounds, are pretty good, even if they're lacking what feels like hundreds of frames of animations to run smoothly. And the collision boxes are imaginary, cause you never know if and where on the enemy sprite your punch or kick will connect. Fistfight is a chore, and I wouldn't recommend seeking it out, let alone playing it. Flying Corps Gold is a patched and expanded version of year prior's Flying Corps, and it's a World War I themed fly combat simulation. Flying is apparently the safest mode of transportation, or so they say, but when I think of those coffin-like WW1 planes, made in large parts of wood, strings and dreams, I feel like whoever's inside is literally a flying corpse, but with an E at the end. Oh well, we had to start somewhere to get to where we are today, technologically speaking. But my feelings aside, Flying Corps Gold being one of the early full 3D simulations is not bad at all. It supports all the major at the time accelerators under DOS and Windows, pretty decent graphics and accurate sounds. Flight model feels realistic, but not overly so you can still pull off some of those movie-inspired Daredevil moves when need arises. And the guns are appropriately heavy and clunky, as they would have been when front-mounted on a plane back then. So aiming and hitting anything with them requires getting used to, but when you do, it feels like a second nature. And most importantly, it's always fun to see those bullets tear through the olden paper planes. The selection of craft in the game from 1917-1918 is pretty wide, and they all feel different and unique when flying. Enemy AI is decent, if not great, and there's quite a lot of missions to complete, split into their respective campaigns. So, if you're in a mood to make your mark on some of the most famous World War I air battles, there was no better choice in 1997 than Flying Corps Gold. Fountain of Dreams is Electronic Arts' unofficial follow-up to earlier cult classic Wasteland, a post-apocalyptic adventure role-playing. And as sequels, even those unofficial go, this one's not bad. It's perhaps not good enough to be compared to the original, and that's probably why it remained mostly unknown, but if you get into its story, it's pretty playable in its own right. Fountain of Dreams takes place several decades after the bombs fell in Florida, a state that broke off from the mainland after devastating nuclear attacks that literally tore it off the continent. Inhabitants of the now island split into the opposing groups, whose differences deepened over the years of separation from civilization. Survival is constantly threatened by mutation that's slowly overtaking the life in Florida, and even more so, crazy and dangerous faction of so-called killer clowns, descendants of the former circus performers who were stranded in the remote state after the bombs fell. When killer clowns killed the only person knowing how to stop mutation from spreading, your group of survivors task you with a mission of finding and sourcing the cure for it. Sounds pretty cool, right? Sure, it may not be the best background story you've heard of, perhaps even today, but it's definitely something that's an excellent starting off point. Very similar to first Fallout with its water chip / gag and all. If you played Wasteland, you'll feel right at home in Fountain, as everything is done similarly, and no wonder as it's running on the same engine. The game world, while rather small being an island, feels interesting, unique and alive. So some characters and enemies may only be present in certain locations at certain points of night and day. It's worth keeping that in mind, as they may have their own schedules. And it's important to point out that the mutations you're seeking cure for can affect others and your character too, so theoretically, no two playthroughs should be the same, with you getting different boons and buffs each time. There's obviously a lot of interesting and team-appropriate skills and items to acquire, and if you're an RPG nut, it's definitely a title to try out. Fountain of Dreams is not without its faults, however. First of all, it's rather small, the island and the game overall, and feels more like a standalone DLC to Wasteland rather than the full game. And secondly, and arguably more importantly, the difficulty curve of combat encounters ramps up quickly, so you gotta play smart and save often. Dino Jr. in Canyon Capers is a vertically scrolling platformer in which you play as Dino, who has to collect all the treasures in each level going either up or downwards. If it looks like a game you've seen before but something's not right and you can't put your finger to what, then perhaps a little game called Huckleberry Hound in Hollywood Capers will come to mind, cause they're identical other than the main character and setting. Anyway, as I was saying, in Canyon Capers you collect treasures for points, and when you grab them all, a level is completed. There's 5 of these in each of the 4 worlds, so a total of 20 stages to beat. Said worlds are creatively named as Underworld, Sea World, Canyon World and Sky World. So yeah, game writing at its finest. Not an issue, just an observation. There are obviously tons of dangers and hazards, alive or otherwise, so avoiding the creatures wandering the stages or avoiding falling rocks, spitting fire and little drops, to name a few, is a must. There are however health pickups in the form of hearts here and there, so grabbing them should help you on your adventure. Especially that there's no saves of any kind, and Canyon Capers plays like the best games of the 80s did, so from the beginning to an end, with no saves coming in between, all in one sitting. If you manage to complete Dino Jr. in Canyon Capers, you can carry on and replay it, but the game will be a tad more difficult for an added challenge, which is always nice if you're someone who likes to replay the same content for score. It's perhaps not the best platformer out there, but it can definitely hold your attention for a little while. Oh, and I almost forgot, there are bonus stages too, so there's that. Disc is a futuristic sports game for 1 or 2 players. The objective of the game, or the match, as you play single matches or championship against 16 opponents really, is to either defeat the opponent on the other side of the arena by hitting him with the thrown disc several times, or by removing floor from under him, destroying the walls behind him that mirror the floor tiles. That's simple, yes. But behind this perceived simplicity lies a pretty complex and fun strategically game. You can throw the disc at the wall to have it bounce off of it and go towards the opponent's side, or directly at him. Both have their uses. Be careful with throwing it directly at the crafty opponent or a CPU at higher difficulty levels, however, as they may catch the disc rather than be hit with it, and then they're in possession, which is not something you'd like to happen. On the flip side, you can catch the disc too. So there's that. This very simple gaming concept is surprisingly addicting when played against a friend, as it's a game that doesn't rely on your agility alone, and smart plays are rewarded too. The CPU skill differs along with its difficulty level, and while he's a noob at the lowest, at highest he'll be a real challenge. Graphics, while not mind-blowing, are nicely drawn and detailed. though pretty samey all throughout the game, which is a bit disappointing, and I would enjoy the players to be all differently styled. Kinda like Nintendo always does with their party games, sticking a dozen or so completely different characters in that all have their good and bad sides and special skills. Perhaps it's not necessary addition in a game like this, but would definitely be a welcome one, and would have extended game's replayability considerably. Sounds are, well, yes, they are. So they exist, but they're neither great nor bad, just there representing the on-screen action. So if you like odd sports and unusual playing games against others, Disc is a good pick. If you don't, then ignore it and jump straight into our next game. Elfland is a shareware adventure platformer divided in half, with first part subtitled Gorgimer's Castle and available for free, and second, The Troll Caves, unlocked via purchase. And the inspiration behind it is beyond obvious. It's clearly based off Commander Keen, both in terms of presentation and graphics. Well, business model too, but that's not as important. Story-wise, the trolls have invaded your homeland and you must seek out help of Gorgimer, the alchemist, in defeating them. He has a potion that could help against them, but getting to him and convincing him to part with it would be a task and a half. Nothing you can't handle though, but still not a piece of cake. You can play as either he or she, Elfie or Elfita respectively, but other than the different gender and looks, the characters don't have any unique to them abilities. The adventuring aspect of the game mainly focuses on conversations with different friendly NPCs, and you should do it as often as you find them, because they will not only reveal the plot, but will also serve you some useful gameplay tips every now and then. The enemies are aplenty obviously, and there are a whole assortment of different creatures, from regular animals like birds or snakes, all the way to the oddities like jumping springs or pink bipedal balls with eyes and teeth. Weird stuff, man. And while they can't be killed per se, you can throw berries at them to stun them temporarily. There's few kinds of berries differing in color and how they work, so it's good to test them all out and learn their optimal usage scenarios. Graphics, as you can see, are not great, only using EGA, but they're easily distinguishable and you never have to wonder if something's a hazard, an enemy or a background. Sounds are terrible and honestly something that would be best left turned off if you ask me, but it may be more of a me issue than a general complaint. I'm Batman! What do you mean there's a lot of those me issues, Bruce? Sorry, he's in a mood today. Anyway, there is something I don't particularly enjoy in Elfland, and it's controls that use 9 separate keys on your keyboard. Which is not much today in modern titles, but if you keep in mind how simple Elfland is, there was no reason for such complexity of controls. Other than that, it's a fun little game. Gogo Yurbyol, which I've no doubt butchered the name of here, is a Korean top-down vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. It's another of those games that could have been more popular if it ever got Western release, as it's not that bad actually. Sure, the cuteness seems to be spilling out of the screen, sweetening everything up beyond belief, and to the level most sane minds can't comprehend, but don't let it fool you, as it's not an easy game whatsoever. For the most part, it plays like your everyday bullet hell shooter, with numerous enemies coming at you, showering the screen with projectiles, and interesting, more demanding bosses popping up every once in a while. But unlike most other games in the genre, you don't die after a single hit but have a health bar, so clearly devs knew how demanding their title ended up being. There are a couple of weapons available from the start, and they can be upgraded to more powerful versions for more oomph during those high pressure difficult encounters. Graphics, while cutesy, are really nice, although I feel like the reduction of size of bullets, both yours and enemies, would be of benefit to gameplay, as they wouldn't have literally covered the whole screen, and it would be easier to navigate between their countless collision boxes. Sounds and music are decent, even if nothing to write home about. Overall, Gogo is a fun but difficult shooter that you should definitely check out if you get a chance, as it's really difficult to come by in the West. What does tried and tested Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man formula need to become relevant again? Nothing, some would argue, but since these two originals already spawned countless clones, I can't agree with that statement. A novelty, anything creative that would shake up the formula or introduce something unseen would be welcome. Enter Greedy, Pac-Man with 3 extra coatings of foundation, fresh layer of lipstick and a dark enchanting eyeliner. On the surface, it's the same game where you pack your way through mazes, munching on pellets and avoiding ghosts. Other than the typical for Pac-Man power pellets, there are also numerous power-ups like movement speed upgrades, score multipliers, wildcards, and invincibility among others. And power-downs like reverse controls or inability to eat pellets for a while, to name a few. Fun stuff, real game-changing pickups, right? And all these make the familiar gameplay mechanics fresh and fun once again. Other than that, there's also a limited rechargeable speed booster that you can use at any point, provided that it's ready. And it will save your life more than once, I promise. You can earn extra lives by collecting a matching group of colorful crystals, rather than the set amount of points like in the original. Greedy may not be as iconic or as fondly remembered game as Pac-Man was, especially that it released years later, but it can definitely be as fun, if you're in the right mindset and don't mind a bit different albeit refreshed gameplay formula. Included level editor adds a lot to the replayability too, if you're someone who likes to create your own stages. Hurl is a very unusual first-person shooter. Did I say very enough times already? Just to be on a safe side, very unusual. Like Ken's Labyrinth, but more. Okay, some of you may know what I'm getting at by sheer mention of that other game. Hurl targets kids as its main audience, but younger ones, those that don't crave bloody action Doom provides, but are still very much into Sesame Street, rainbows, unicorns, plushies, Barbies and blue clouds on white sky. Sometimes all rolled into one. But let's cover the plot first, as it's kid appropriate too. Bob the Slob, a leader of the hardcore union of radical litterbugs, the titular Hurl, took control over so-called Slob Zone, surrounded himself with equally as dirty animals that serve and protect him. On top of that, he did the unthinkable, the terrible, the crimiest of all crimes. I know, no such word, who cares? He stole all of the world's clean underwear, so only what's still in used underwear vending machines in Japan is what we're left with. Not enough, I'm afraid. So what you have to do is to recover it. But to get to the Bob, you need to go through hundreds of his dirt-loving creatures, and they will continuously attack you with eggs, cigar smoke and other nasties, just to stop you in your tracks. Since Hurl is a game for kids, you're not really shooting at or killing them either. You toss bars of soap, water balloons, deodorants and likes at them to clean them up. And when they are, finely clean that is, they don't die. They just sorta lose interest in you. On the flip side, you can't die either. You just get more and more dirty from enemy attacks and eventually become so-called slobbed and have to repeat the level. That's it. Your quote-unquote ammo is found or purchased at vending machines in exchange for rubbish that you collect while playing. There's 10 levels in the game, they're all unique and hardly any assets repeat between them. For the most part, there are also locations from real life, like school, bus stop or a farm, but sadly, they're not very big. Perhaps not to confuse younger gamers, or perhaps the reason was different. We will never know. What we do know, however, is that apart from being directed at preteens, Hurl was pro-eco, teaching of importance and benefits of cleaning up of public spaces. A noble initiative, no doubt about that, but it clearly wasn't noble enough to guarantee the title's popularity. Happy Land Adventures is a cutesy fantasy side-scrolling platformer, in which you play as a small dog that has to gather and save all the lost colorful animals and then lead them to the so-called happy zones. Animal heaven gateways perhaps? Or the farm that so many of us were told about when our pets died? Neither, I think, as they all seem to be in the tip-top shape. Once you manage to save enough animals and deliver them to the happy zones, you're free to move to the next stage. Not many people know this, but this little gem of a game was created as a freeware entry for the Game Dev contest, and then easily won it. Unsurprisingly so, as behind the over-the-top sweet graphics lies hell of a game. Something that many would willingly pay for, given its quality. There are obviously numerous pickups other than the animals that supplement your score, and enable extra abilities for a little dog, and what feels like hundreds of hidden locations full of gems and fruit to gather. The final version of the game included earliest standalone Xmas expansion and the level editor, addition of which spawned numerous user-created levels that extended the life of this amazing platformer considerably. My first experience with Happy Land Adventures was when I was at uni studying to become IT technician/teacher, believe it or not, and had to spend some time teaching IT in primary and secondary schools to gain extra credit and necessary experience. And I happened to end up in the school that my youngest sister was a student of. Well, I aimed to get there, chances were slim but stars aligned correctly, and I landed where I was supposed to. And everyone in her class played Happy Land every second they got free, as if they were possessed by it. At first, I disregarded it as a game for kids, after all it was not played from the first-person perspective, there were no guns and no cities or nations to manage within it whatsoever, so it was definitely not a title for me. Or so I thought. But then I gave it a go one of those days and I was instantly hooked. It's easily one of the best PC platformers of the late DOS era, and one you should do yourself a favor and check out. Oh, and I'm not a teacher today. I'm an unhappy office worker of nondescript job responsibilities in a small privately owned family business with weird connections all over the world, few odd business trips on my resume, and hopes and dreams to change that career for something else. Hard Nova is an incredibly ambitious sci-fi space exploration role-playing that I never knew of, and it's a pity because it looks like something I would have loved. In short, your spaceship was shot down and only you and the navigator managed to escape with your lives. Since you still have a lot of contracts to complete, you're a mercenary after all, your group's head gave you a new small ship and a task of finding and forming a new capable crew and complete set jobs. All that happens as the universe is in turmoil. Various groups fight for the supremacy in the so-called 4 systems that the game takes place in. The sun of one of the remote planets is dying, and if no one's gonna step in to do something about it and change the history, the entire race living on the surface will soon become extinct. There's a lot happening is what I'm saying. All around. You can play as he or she, Stark or Nova respectively, a mercenary survivor. They differ slightly in abilities, which will telegraph itself best during mid to late gameplay and in dialogues. So you'll have to hire a crew, and they are all described by 2 sets of separate abilities, land and ship-based. First are mainly but not only combat-centric and will generally speaking improve crew's affinity towards fighting on land. Ship-based abilities are more technical and will be useful both in and out of space combat. Each crew member has to have a assigned role on your ship, so you'll need a pilot, technician, engineer, and so on. Upon gaining levels, you can manually assign experience points to various skills to improve them for characters who leveled up. When orbiting planet, you can take a hovercraft to land on it, and the approach and landing is done manually. It requires a bit of practice, so it's best that you start as soon as possible to get used to it. You can take 3 crew members to the surface, and it's best to pick them in a way that their skills would complement each other, as they will not only take part in combat encounters, but also interact with other characters and partake in all sorts of generally speaking role-playing activities. It's worth pointing out that in land-based real-time combat, you only have a direct control of the party leader. Hard Nova's universe is composed out of 4 star systems: military-focused aerial, resources-rich ruin, fuel and water abundant Siberian, and Mastasani, where you start the game. Each of them consists of many planets, and they are connected via a grid of stargates. Your ship can naturally be upgraded when progressing through the game with more advanced components or weapons. And since you can do that, it's clear that there's money in Hard Nova. And where there's money, there's trade. And yes, you can, will, and have to participate in it too. 2 of the most prominent features of the game are its plot, which while tad linear is not restrictive and full of unexpected events, twists and turns, and openness of the game world, which coincidentally is the game's biggest fault too. Cause while it allows you to basically go anywhere you want from the get-go, if you decide to do so and sidestep from the main plot too much, you may encounter parts of the future quest dialogues here and there, and then when you eventually get to them, you may not remember what was said, and there'll be no way of coming back to it. So yeah, it's not game-breaking, but may require you to note things down when trailing off of the beaten path, so to speak. Either way, Hard Nova is a unique game worth checking out. Hotshot is 1 or 2 player sports/Arkanoid mixture of a game, with the second player controlled by human or CPU. Your choice, though you know what I feel about playing against CPU in such games. Hotshot is viewed from a side perspective, and the idea behind it is that simple. The screen is divided in the middle vertically to more or less half of its height, with both players standing on their own sides, and blocks hanging above them. The aim of the game is to destroy the blocks on your side of the screen before the opponent does it on his. So you do so by sucking the ball using your hoover-like device and then shooting it out at your side's blocks. Now, in most Arkanoid-like games, you'd just keep grabbing the ball and throwing it at the blocks, hardly ever losing possession. In Hotshot, it's impossible, as quite often the ball starts moving erratically, not in the straight line, or not following any even simplified rules of gravity. It's not a constant issue, but persists often enough to be extremely annoying. Worst of all, it's by design. For the most part, it makes the game feel totally random, and as if your skill or lack thereof didn't influence the outcome of the game considerably enough to feel like you were actively participating in winning or losing. In competitive games, I feel lack of control and participation are the biggest of sins. And one I have not seen often, but little title named Pro Soccer 2190 on Amiga comes to mind. That's not a story for today's video though. If any of the players fail to catch the ball or is hit with it, he is knocked down and possession is moved to the other. Personally, I can't recommend Hotshot to anyone, but if you're someone who played it back in the day and found it fun, please let me know why. In the comments below, obviously, as it seems like a punishment to me and not a game. Somewhere in the heart of the nondescript South American country lies a secret industrial complex hidden in the tropics. Its exact purpose is largely unknown, other than that it's used for illegal experimentation, whatever the term may mean. Also depends on who is the decisive side here, cause a thing illegal in one country may be completely fine and common in another. The best example of that are the Kinder Surprise eggs, which are omnipresent all over Europe and generally speaking part of our childhood experience, while in the US they are not available at all. At least not in the same form of a toy hidden in a plastic egg surrounded by the milk chocolate outer layer of goodness. Granted, most of the toys in them suck, but the sense of anticipation and then discovery you experience as a kid opening one of these while munching on delicious sweet milky crust is rather special. One way or another, coming back to our game, any attempts of infiltration of set base proved unsuccessful and many good men were lost trying, as the task is clearly above pay grade and skill set of regular secret agents and most special forces. It is decided that the best of the best, the one and only, the hero, must be the one to do it. I'm not sure what strings had to be pulled, favors called in, or how much money was spent, but probably close to a budget of a small South European country, but eventually you agreed. So, you must enter the complex and deal with the forces behind its existence. Industrial Killers is a sci-fi espionage-themed first-person shooter. Sounds great, right? Well, it isn't really, as it was only conceived to serve as a technical demo for the developer's pie-in-the-sky software 3D game creation kit. So as games go, it's rather limited. The software though is a powerful piece of programming. Not as capable as real 3D engines, but it could be used by those less tech-savvy too. And that's probably its biggest selling point. Never mind. The game is short, simple and not great, but it's interesting, so if you're into checking out all of those quirky old games, it's definitely one to try out. As Jet Strike's story goes, the evil forces known only as SPAD, with double D, not like the potato, have been working behind the scenes to corrupt and eventually overthrow governments of most major countries all around the world. It's been in the works for so long, in fact, that stopping SPAD in peaceful manner no longer seems feasible. The only response that's left is violent. Even worse, you can't really expect any help from anyone, as major countries in most cases are already corrupted and either paid off or straight up working for the SPAD. So you, your commanding officer and a friendly and incredibly gifted mechanic are all that stands against the total and final chaos. And this is where the game starts. If you like Wings of Fury, you'll love Jet Strike. It's same but different. A more varied, bigger and in my opinion better game. Sure, the controls are not as intuitive and not the easiest to comprehend at start, but when you get used to them, they will end up feeling very natural. The game offers dozens upon dozens of various real-life planes from different eras, helicopters and other not necessarily realistic flying vehicles and creatures. The campaign is composed out of loads of missions, 135 if memory serves right, so more content than majority of arcade games offered at the time. So you'll be destroying enemy installations, you'll engage in complicated and demanding dogfights, you'll perform bomb runs, and will even drop friendly personnel behind the enemy lines. And all that is just scratching the surface. There's quite a few weapons to choose from too, and you'll have to arm your craft before each mission, keeping its objectives in mind. Jet Strike's sounds and graphics are really good. Perhaps not the best for the year, but very detailed and smoothly animated, guaranteeing that all your fails are yours and yours alone. And you will fail here and there, on some of those more demanding missions that is. But you know what? You won't care. You'll just jump back into the next craft and will keep trying. Because if you pass that initial high entry threshold, Jet Strike becomes hell of a game and it plays like a charm. That initial challenge, along with lack of any useful tutorials, are the biggest factors in its lack of popularity, I feel. I may be wrong, but I credit the two with this real cool game's obscurity. Jump and Pump sounds like a sports move, but it's not. It's a fun single-screen arcade platform party multiplayer bash. I know, a lot of words you just heard there and they don't really make much sense in a string like that chained together in one sentence, but hear me out. In Jump and Bump, up to 4 players playing on the same PC or over the network fight for points. And quite literally fight, as the game is extremely bloody. Your task here is super simple. Just jump on another bunny's head, effectively killing and then respawning it somewhere on the level. All to get the point. Yep, just one. Ichi, Eins, or any other way you can telegraph a singular racing score. Each kill is an extra point, and whomever gets more points wins. And by extension of that, is more of a killer bunny than all other killer bunnies are. If you have a good gaming keyboard, Jump and Bump is incredibly fun and one of the more laugh-inducing multiplayer ROMs few of you can have sitting at the same screen. And a definite candidate for an Xbox Game Pass remake / re-release. It would be a great fit. Now, there's tons of different levels in game and hundreds more available for download online. Learning the layout, strong and weak areas, and how to effectively use environments in your favor like springboards, slippery surfaces, water and such will be a key to demonstrating to your soon-to-be ex-friends how much better of a gamer you are than they could ever be, or just to have fun on one of those lazy afternoons. Your call. Jump and Bump is very simple game, but it proves that they don't need to be overly complicated, feature tons of special moves, exploding attacks, hidden areas or such to be fun. All you really need is few over-the-top cute killer bunnies, buckets and mops ready to clean all the blood, and a couple of friends to have fun. That said, Jump and Bump requires at least 2 people, as there's no CPU to take their spots, so if you're all alone, it loses 99.9% of its appeal. Leo the Lion, developed by Lyrix Longsoft and published by CD Projekt, now of Witcher and Cyberpunk 2077 fame, is a Polish cartoony action-adventure platformer. Your task, playing as titular skin Leo the Lion, is to recover crown that was stolen from you. To do so, you have to travel through 4 islands of 3 stages each, so overall 12 beautifully lush levels covering areas like swamps, magic castle or a pyramid to name a few, all within the so-called Lion Archipelago. And you'll also be fighting off baddies big and small, collecting and using various objects and solving puzzles. Items like machete, coconut, stick, fly swat or snow pick will all have certain usage scenarios marked with appropriate icons. While you do all that, you'll also have to escape the island beating the volcanic eruption, so there's that. You're not really fighting the timer though, but it's in the game's story, so was worth a mention. The graphics are fantastic, which is both good and bad. It's great because the game looks excellent, like a real-life cartoon that you can participate in, and have the character and his surroundings respond to your controls. And bad because while all the enemies are nicely animated and large, with a lot of detail to them, it makes it difficult to gauge by eye where the collision box's borders are, and can lead to uncomfortable situations while playing. Leo the Lion was marketed towards younger audiences, which was a mistake on CD Projekt's side, as some of its puzzles and levels are designed in a rather challenging manner and maybe just a bit too difficult for younger ones. Interestingly enough, when Leo the Lion came out, it only sold 10,000 copies. Which is a terrible result, but in the same time it's estimated that close to 150,000 illegal copies were circling around, most of them in Poland. Few years later, piracy would mostly die off in the country, but in 1996 it was one of the reasons why the game failed to gain any real traction and bring developers money. Leo's abroad reception was rather cold and it never reached respectable sales either. It's a fun, if a bit underrated game that definitely deserves another chance. Despite looking like a late 16-bit turn-based role-playing, judging by the screens only, Little Monk is a Taiwanese top-down arcade shooter, and a pretty decent game at that if I say so myself. And I do, so there's that. If it's said in the video, it's gotta be the truth. Everyone knows that. Fact. Don't quote or fact-check me on that though. The protagonist that you're playing as is a little bald Shaolin monk. Technically speaking, being who he is, he should be doing all his fighting with fast and deadly kung fu moves. It's not the case though, and he's firing various projectiles big and small, left and right like a little Shaolin badass that he is. He does look eerily similar to Krillin from Dragon Ball Z though, so I just can't escape the feeling that he should be throwing punches and uppercuts and not shots, but whatever. It's a me problem and not something wrong with the game. Anyway, you'll be traveling the land, fighting various animals and mythical folklore Chinese creatures, so bees, boars, bats, dragonflies, ghosts, and many other that I cannot even try to pretend to understand the genesis of. Then there are bosses, which are huge, often nearly as big as fourth of the screen and even more imaginative than the regular baddies. For instance, gigantic skeleton drunk who turns into what looks like a ball of yarn to move between the spots and throws green ice at you. Yes, ice. And I have no proof that he's drunk other than the bottle that he holds onto like he would to his life. Or Black Bear, rolling on a barrel as if there was no tomorrow. Weird stuff, man. There's a ton of them. There are obviously various power-ups, special weapons, bombs or even limited use spells scattered around the game world for you to find too, so exploration and discovery is well rewarded. As shooters go, Little Monk may have more in common with games like Commando rather than Contra or R-Type, but despite the novel and rarely used in 1995 design approach, it's really fun and pleasure to go through. Graphics and sounds are excellent too, mixing cute with mystical and historical, all very detailed, colorful and well-fitting. Little Monk should be well known, so even if it's years too late, it's still worth to shed a little light on it today. If you get a chance, check it out. Livingstone 2 is a sequel to much more well-known and popular first game, Livingstone, I presume. It starts directly after the original and it's also a 2D side-scrolling platformer, giving off very strong Indiana Jones vibes. There's one thing that's different though, and it basically changes everything from the original. In the first game, where you look for the Dr. Livingstone, at the very end, in a cliffhanger moment, you learn that the person you found was not in fact him. The second, this game, starts with you being found supposedly at the end of the first one by said adventurer and playing as the Doctor now. Continuity is not Livingstone 2's strongest suit, it seems. Let's be clear, it's not very important gameplay-wise, but kinda breaks the plot if you care for these in your platformers. Anyway, this time you have to find the ancient treasure hidden in the ruins of the heart of the African jungle and then escape it. The jungle, not the ruins. Though they are in the jungle, so them too, I suppose. Once again, you're armed with a whip and a pole to help with traversal and can pick up other weapon and non-weapon objects. The latter is useful in various puzzles during your adventure. Jungle, as they tend to be in video games, is full of both animals bent on killing you seemingly for no reason and traps popping up from everywhere. Granted, I've never been to a jungle, so perhaps that's an accurate representation of reality, I'll probably never know. There's two quote-unquote worlds that you have to traverse through in Livingstone too, and they're rather large and interesting, even if graphically simplistic, with mostly solid black backgrounds. A step up from the first game, no doubt about that, but they're unimpressive nonetheless. If you played the first title and enjoyed it, then this one is a must. If you didn't, then keep in mind that the traps are rather annoying and will often require perfect timing to be beaten. Fortunately, you'll get to discover many shortcuts as you play, so that'll be a little helpful. Lorna is a side-scrolling action-adventure arcade sci-fi fantasy beat-em-up. I know, I got lost half the way too. A lot of words to describe the simple concept you see on the screen. Lorna is based on the popular Spanish graphic novel by Alfonso Aspiri and portrays a skimpy-clothed heroine shaking booty and kicking ass. Not necessarily in that order. Either way, in Lorna you have to stick to tried and tested beat-em-up formula of if it moves, mow it down. And if you will also succeed. You can engage enemies in hand-to-hand combat or use your rifle. Although it's worth pointing out that the ammo is limited, so you can't rely on shooting only. Lorna is composed out of 5 stages, 3 of which are beat-em-up brawling bonanzas, and 2, second and fourth to be precise, are viewed from behind the back hoverbike chase levels. They're a nice change of pace, though honestly entirely unnecessary in a game that's not great on its own. It plays slow and choppy, looks rather disappointing, and seems to be placing all its bets on bikini-wearing heroine. Which is cool and all, but not enough to save the game with below-average gameplay. Interestingly enough, Lorna came out on the Amiga in the same time and looks much better there. Sure, it's largely unimportant as it's the same disappointing experience, but if you really have to check it out, better do it on Commodore's system. Now that's how you end a game preview in DOS-centric video, by saying that it's better on another system. I'm a pro. I'm Batman. Yes you are. So we're a pro and Batman, the dynamic duo like no other. As the name, Gamebox cover and its title screen says, Low Blow is all about that. Illegal moves in boxing, which in this boxing title by Synergistic Software are actually completely legal. And even more so, very effective. Kinda like they are in real life, hence why they're banned here. Now, knowing all that, it's kinda clear that Low Blow is not a simulation but rather an arcade fighting game. Which is not bad, but also bases its whole gameplay gimmick on its single mechanic alone. And that's not much, I'm afraid. You can play either in single versus bout against a friend, or in a tournament, which is the main fare of the game, going through a series of increasingly more difficult opponents to become the champion. Champion of crotch jabs, I suppose. Or Master Ball Wrecker. Both fit as well. Anyway, the range of moves available to fighters is rather limited, so you'll have to work your way around the limitation by mixing them in such a way that they would form efficient combos. It's perhaps not great gameplay-wise, but if you don't mind it too much, then you can actually enjoy Low Blow. Graphics, for EJA at least, are excellent, displaying gigantic for the time and system sprites, nicely detailed backgrounds, be it in the gym, ring or fighters' portraits, and overall feel like the absolute best that could be squeezed out of the aging architecture. Sounds are not great and not worth any attention here really. So yeah. To summarize, Low Blow, if approached while keeping in mind that it's an arcade game and with the right mindset of not expecting too much, can actually be fun, especially if you have someone else there with you to destroy. Alone or when having too high expectations, based on screenshots alone for instance, the way we used to often judge games back in the day browsing Gaming Mags, it would quickly crash and burn in confrontation with what it offers in reality. It's not a bad game, but it's definitely not a good one either. It's, well, a game. Magic Makeups is a DOS reimagination of BBC Micro's classic single-screen platformer. Instead of the humanoid character like in the original, however, you're controlling a small car. So if you ever wondered how it would be to play a platformer with a car, now's your chance to check it out. Your goal is as simple as they come, to drive over all the mushrooms on each stage, cause it's definitely not collecting when you're in a car, and when you do, a block leading to the next stage will unlock itself and you'll be able to move on. All stages are obviously crawling with enemies, from spiders through crabs all the way to weird green monsters of questionable origin, and everything in between. Since you aren't with absolutely nothing, and I mean it, nothing, you have to avoid them. And they're pretty crafty bunch, cause while some are stationary and only move on a preset path, others will actively chase you if you get within their aggro range. Anyway, having to avoid the enemies is a bit odd, cause you're in a car after all, and they're all in most cases just small creatures that you should be able to easily drive over, but whatever. Perhaps it's a hidden lesson to avoid driving over pedestrians, whether they're human or not. Anyway, like I said, you gotta avoid the bodies and jump between the platforms to get to hard to reach spots. Also, if you've never seen a car using a ladder, it's another little new thing you'll get to experience in Magic Makeups. As you do all that, it's crucial that you quickly learn how to gauge your jumps as reach, as if you misjudge them and start falling and it's from anything higher than few blocks, you'll die. Or well, crash and die. Depends how you wanna look at it. I don't think the order is important, outcome is though. All levels are timed, and while in the first bunch it's irrelevant and something you may very well overlook, the further you go, the more challenging they will become and more prominent the time limit will feel too. Graphics and sounds as you see and hear are not great, but gameplay is pretty fun, provided you enjoy those more classic than Mario platformers, those that originated in the arcades in times of Joust, Arkanoid or Centipede. Simple games with simple loop, but demanding and with steadily growing difficulty. Magic Makeups obviously is a DOS original and did not come from arcades, but it shares the same spirit. If you're a creative type, it also includes a built-in level editor, so there's that. Magic of Pandoria came out in 1994 on PC and C64 of all platforms, and it's the same game that plays a bit different, but I'll get back to it in a minute. The game obviously takes place in the kingdom of Pandoria, gods of which, seeing the evil of men, decided to abandon it, morphed into crystal shards and hidden in the underworld to lie there in eternal slumber. In time, eons later, learning about it, two rival archmages, magical badasses extraordinaire, take upon themselves to locate the shards and take their power. Magic of Pandoria is a very unusual for the time strategy title that's a little similar to the Dungeon Master games. You build a dungeon, or more likely dig in the underworld, creating dungeon in the process. So, to sustain this operation and your search, you'll have to build, manage and defend your mines. You'll be hiring differently specialized employees of various fantasy kinds, folk like mine workers, hoilers, craftsmen, researchers and warriors. They all get experience as the time goes by and require payment for their services. So while digging corridors, rooms, filling them up with traps and trying to research new tools and weapons, you'll be also earning riches to keep your workers content. And fighting too, obviously, both offensively going for the opponent's mines and defensively on your own turf, so to speak. Despite what you may think, being accustomed to more well-known Dungeon Master, simple graphically Magic of Pandoria is a rather complex game. I mean, just take a look at the sheer number of buttons all around the borders of the game board. And there's a lot that you can do in the game, so getting familiar with the manual is a necessity, or at the very least a good video tutorial. Magic of Pandoria on PC is hex-based and in real time, while on C64 it's top-down and plays in turn-based mode. It's a pretty notable difference if you ask me, but the gameplay concepts and goals are actually identical. It's worth seeing on both, but we're all about PC here today. Oh, and there's also a separate light version that's much easier to grasp for a new player, so there's that. It's not a rule, obviously, but I feel that many of those late DOS games, those that came out in the second half of the 90s or even early 2000s, were either very polished and released by a few big studios that still haven't moved to Windows, or conceptually interesting titles by small teams or even singular creators. Often pretty simple in terms of presentation, but either mixing known genres in a fun way or doing something no one's done before. Operation Carnage clearly falls into the latter category. It's not a big game, but it's unique, fun and action-packed. Aliens attacked the Earth and took over, and now use us as food for their souls out of all things. So, a delicacy, but either way you look at it, we're cattle. So, you, not being able to take it anymore, dust off your gear and gun, suit up and set off to rid the world of the alien scum. I mean, it was you or Manbat, and if I'm to be honest, I'm not sure he'd be able to fit in any of his bat suits the way he's eating now. I'm Batman. Oh no, not you buddy, it's the other Batman I'm talking about. You're still great. Anyway, before he puts the two and two together, Operation Carnage is a top-down arena-like shooter where you mow through thousands of fun and unique enemies fighting for Earth's freedom. The game is divided into 8 sectors and each of them into smaller rooms/arenas. When you defeat all the aliens in the arena, a door opens up to another. In the last room of each sector, you fight a boss, which is usually either a huge alien or an alien ship. Naturally, as in most shooters, there's quite a few weapons and upgrades you'll find on your way, things like a machine gun, plasma gun, fire gun, so different guns, you get the point. Scatter bomb, extra energy and so on and so on and so on. There's a lot of this, is what I'm saying. And as Smash TV-like shooters go, Operation Carnage is really cool, and if you like this, do yourself a favor and track it down. Metropolis is a sci-fi parser-based adventure game, and while I personally hate parser games with a passion, this one's definitely worth a mention. The year is 5067. Yeah, 5067, so a little over 3000 years from now. Good to know we actually do survive till then. You're a security agent working for a generic software company and will find yourself in the middle of the plot that will have you solve 10 different crimes all around the city. You'll control your character with arrows, but all the interactions, dialogues and everything else will be text-based and will require you to input appropriate commands. Interestingly enough, the text parser in Metropolis feels more natural than in many other games in the genre, as instead of questions like "Ask man about scissors," you can just get to him and say, "What do you know about scissors?" But it's a double-edged sword. as the game only recognizes those quote-unquote realistic sentences and not simplified ones used by any other text parser game on the market. So it's a learning experience all on its own. Another unusual thing about Metropolis is that there's virtually no inventory puzzles in it, and it's nearly entirely conversation-driven title. So all situations, all puzzles, everything is resolved by talking to other characters and asking the right questions. And while it may seem odd and way too out of ordinary to be enjoyable, it's surprisingly complex and fun. So I heard. Each of the 10 crimes was committed on a different level of a multi-story city, and each is tad more demanding than the previous. If you're into text adventure games, it's a hidden gem that's not to miss. If you like me though, just carry on to the next game in the video. Even though Oberon 69 sounds like a funky position from the book of all books, the one I'm talking about here today is utter crap and deserves to be forgotten. Here, I said it. Go to town in the comments below if you feel that's necessary. It is also a flip-screen sci-fi action platformer, and while it's an interesting mix, Oberon itself is not great. Story-wise, in a distant future, the air became unbreathable on Earth, the world was slowly turning into that desert, so we've ventured into space to build our cities there and most importantly to survive. And for the most part, it was not a bad plan. Settlements spawned left and right, and we seemed to be on the right path for saving our species. But on one of the colonies, the titular Oberon, an unknown ancient life form just awoken from a long slumber, and it seems to be hella aggressive, attacking the population and decimating it. So, naturally, as you always do, you put away your exercise weights, you oil yourself up to have those biceps be so shiny that the alien scum could see their own reflection in them while dying, and you set off to save the babies. Yep, cause in Oberon, you save the babies. Odd, I know, but whatever, it is what it is. So your mission is to find all the babies and send them back to Earth, which given the game's story is a rock barely able to sustain life, so I'm not sure what's your decision process here. But I suppose when there's so many muscles on a body, the blood prioritizes going to them and not to the brain. Anyway, for each kit you gotta purchase a cryogenic valve to send it in, so you'll be buying those in appropriate machines. On your adventure you'll face many different enemies like robots, aliens, alien queens and weird larvae among others, and most will stand no chance against you. Other than those, Oberon 69 came out on the Amiga and few 8-bit systems too, and coincidentally that's what the PC version looks like, as if it was running on ZX Spectrum short of color clash and in 4 instead of 8 colors. So extremely dated for 1990. Its main issue is not graphics however, but the fact that it's just not fun. I mean, Amiga version looking much better, like a proper early 16-bit game, is also crap. Because if you paint a crap in rainbow colors, it will still stink of poo. Olympic Games Atlanta 1996 was actually officially licensed by the Olympic Committee, so it's not a random assortment of disciplines put together by drunk developers on one of those lazy Saturday nights in a pub, but rather something that was supposed to accompany the sporting event itself, build a hype for it and bring in some sweet money. Now, it's in this video too, so while it may have reached a small degree of popularity adjacent to the Olympic Games themselves, it is now ultimately a largely forgotten by the time title. Which is odd, as when you play it with friends or better yet against them, and not alone, it's pretty fun. Especially if some drinks are involved. Non-alcoholic ones obviously, as I wouldn't like to tickle the hairy underbellies of the YouTube overlords in the wrong way after all. Wink wink nudge nudge. So, Olympic Games is a 3D multi-event sports game conceptually similar to Epic's classics, but using modern at the time presentation and then current system capabilities to their fullest. It can be played in an arcade mode or in the Olympic-style tournament, going through all events, which is definitely more fun. It features 15 different disciplines and there are 100 and 400 meter sprint, 100 meter crawl, javelin, hammer and discus throw, long jump, triple jump, high jump, pole vault, fencing, rapid-fire pistol, weightlifting, archery and skeet shooting. Quite a selection of events, right? Another submission of the incredibly annoying long-running events that were for whatever the reason very popular in 8-bit sporting games is truly appreciated. BBC Radio 5's Alan Green provides the commentary, and overall, while not fantastic, the gameplay is fine and with friends around can be a blast. Sure, the early 3D may not look great today, it's rather crude in fact, but it's not hideous and shouldn't detract you from playing. I wouldn't suggest going at it alone, but as a part of a gaming night with buddies, it's a definite highlight. Operation Body Count, or how I like to call it, Poor Man's Die Hard, is a first-person shooter taking place in the Nakatomi Tower. No wait, that's not it. Probably best we start from the beginning. The year is 2012, a far-off future from 1990 for the game released in. I wouldn't say that the world is grim, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows, especially that the man called Victor Balog and his terrorist group have taken control of the UN towers where the leaders of the free world were holding a summit. Never before so many important people have been held hostage at the same time. And since negotiations with the terrorists are out of the question, you being the best member of the elite forces unit are sent to deal with the situation the best way you can. So, turning hundreds of evil dudes into individual puddles of red and pink goo. You're there to effectively compost the villains into natural fertilizer using guns and bullets. You enter the tower through sewers and have 40 levels to go through before you'll be able to save the politicians. The first few levels taking place in said sewers, before you even meet your first terrorist, you fight off giant rats and something called sludge minions, which for all intents and purposes are just weird looking mutants of some kind. When you finally get to the tower, you have to traverse through it going higher and higher and unlock the elevator on each floor by killing a certain number of bodies. Operation Body Count used an interesting mechanic for lives where instead of them, you were given a small squad of soldiers to help you, and whenever one died, you kept on playing as another. You can also give them orders in a limited manner, so they could be told to either follow you or roam freely around the level killing bodies. Additionally, many of the environments could be destroyed, and with use of explosives, even most walls, which not only is a fun gameplay mechanic, but also makes repeated playthroughs more varied, even if just by a little. As in most shooters, there's quite a few weapons to choose from, and shotgun, Uzi, flamethrower and grenade launcher are the most prominent of them all. By 1994 there were arguably better looking, sounding and playing shooters on PC, so Operation Body Count had a difficult start. And given that its underlying technology seemed ancient compared to that of Doom, it was near instantaneously forgotten. I'm Batman! Yes, Bruce, exactly how Mr. Freeze from a movie about it. He too was forgotten. Paganitsu is a shareware puzzle game split into 3 episodes, first of which was available for free, as was most often the case with Apogee's shareware titles. Each episode has 20 levels, and in each stage you'll need to collect all the keys or gems depending on how far you are in the game, and then find a way to get out to the exit unscathed. The levels are filled with boulders, various environmental dangers, and deadly creatures, likes of snakes, spiders and lizards among others. You know, things you don't want to find in your backyard. And you have to puzzle your way through the stages Boulder Dash style, because it is very similar to that all-time classic. So it's possible to lock yourself out of the exit, to die by dropping a boulder on yourself, or even use those boulders to crush the enemies. Fun. Also, same as in original, touching an enemy kills you instantly, so they have to be either avoided or disposed of. Your call. Although, if possible, I'd always suggest doing the latter, as not only it's safer, but also produces more items for you to pick up. Graphics and sounds are not great, but they're not hideous either. Just your standard basic EGA and PC speaker fare. Not great by 1991 standards, but at least the hardware requirements were very modest and most PC owners could play Paganitsu comfortably. So there's that. To summarize, if you like the original Boulder Dash, then Paganitsu is definitely a game for you. If you didn't, then it's not gonna blow you away into changing your mind about it. Passengers on the Wind is an interactive novel kind of an adventure, meaning that it's more of an interactive book where you get to make choices from time to time, rather than actively control characters' movements all throughout. It's based on a French comic strip of the same name and takes place on the eve of the French Revolution in the district of the so-called Triangular Commerce, named so because of the slave trafficking center that's there and coordinated human trade between Britain, America and Africa. Awful habit, but the times were as they were and we can't change them anymore. At least I hope we learned something from them. You're controlling 2 characters. No, scratch that. It's too far-fetched. You're following 2 characters. Hall, British sailor who flees France after being unjustly accused of murder he did not commit, and Isa, female adventurer with a troubled past and a secret to her identity. Passengers of the Wind, despite being a glorified book, is not terribly linear, and only ever converges to a steady point after a while. On the way to it, it gives you quite a lot of freedom with your choices for either Hall or Isa, often leading to different interesting outcomes. Interactivity or lack thereof aside, if you enjoy good and captivating stories, then there is a lot to like in the game and you will enjoy it thoroughly beginning to the end. Pea Shooting Pete is an extended re-release of Speedwad Willy, and it's conceptually based on incredibly fun and popular arcade classic Pang, also known as Buster Bros, with a difference of Pea Shooting Pete being a single-player game only. If you never played Pang, let me explain. The idea is that simple. You're the dude that's at the bottom of the screen, running left and right, and shooting peas from his blowpipe at the balloons bouncing all over. When a balloon is popped, it splits into 2 smaller ones that need to be popped too, and it carries on until the balloons are so small that they don't pop anymore and just disappear when hit. When the screen is cleared of all balloons, you move to the next stage. And when balloon hits you, and it's a tough game so it will at some point whether you want to or not, you obviously lose a life. Fortunately, there's quite a few different power-ups that you can collect while playing, and they will be more than helpful. They can be stuff like extra life, screen freeze, shield, balloon slowdown, or a better shot to name a few. I feel that even though Pea Shooting Pit does not feature destructible walls and floors same way Punk did, it's still a way more demanding game. Which is odd as Original was created to literally eat away coins from players. The reason may be that the balloons feel less fluid and move quicker here. And while it feels a bit simpler than the original, it's only superficial as it's not the same game, only one based off it. Graphics are perhaps not great, often using psychedelic backgrounds that either feature weird twirls or quickly cycling colors, but if you're not sensitive to such effects, they do their work and are not hideous. Gameplay is top-notch though, perhaps not as addictive as Arcade Original, but very fun and long-lasting, provided you don't mind that high difficulty level that is. Overall, if you like arcade games and were a fan of Pang, there's a lot to love here. If it's first time you're seeing the concept, however, I'd risk saying that it's best to start with the original. Pirate Fry and Volcano Island is a freeware point-and-click adventure game made with the Adventure Game Studio, a piece of software that allowed nearly anyone to make adventure games. And they did. And so did Pirate Fry's developer. I mean, just look at the obvious Microsoft Paint graphics in this one. They're terrible, awful, and so bad that they actually begin to look enchantingly great. You know, ironically good. Like so bad that they're art. Like South Park. So, you're Fry, a pirate. But due to some changes in the pirating laws or something of the likes, you have to get a license to carry on being a swashbuckler. To be able to get one, you have to solve a logic test and then pass 3 trials, kinda like Guybrush Threepwood in Secret of the Monkey Island. Obviously nowhere near quality-wise, but thematically similar. The trials require you to kill something or someone, steal something, and redeem yourself by doing something good. So to do something terrible, something bad, and then something good to counter the earlier bads. Other than that, it's a standard point-and-click adventure and it's actually pretty fun, even if rather simplistic in its puzzles. The humor is quite prominent all throughout its hour or so playtime, so if you can overlook the presentation, it's not a bad title for a short chuckle when you have a little free time. It's not gonna be a game you'll remember forever, but that hour or two you spend completing it won't feel wasted either. Pizza Tycoon is a humorous business simulation and management game made by Software 2000, a German-based developer. You know, this began as a running joke some videos ago, I don't know, a year or so back perhaps. I said that German developers made the best management games in the 90s. But as we went more and more in depth with them throughout the Amiga Gaming History series and then those two, it became clear that if it was anything, it definitely was not a joke, but a rock-solid fact. So, rocked. Rock-solid fact. Rocked. Write that down, it's a good one. Anyway, Pizza Tycoon is another incredible proof of that, and also one of my absolute favorites at the time. On the surface, you're a restaurant, an in-time chain of restaurants owner, and a respectable citizen and business owner rolled into one, in a city either in Europe or USA. And you're responsible for everything from renting or buying a building for your pizzeria, through getting all the equipment and furniture, purchasing ingredients, to hiring staff and even designing your own pizzas, preferably based on the tastes and needs of local neighborhood's residents. If that wasn't enough, you have to advertise your business, can take part in pizza competitions, or even deal with shady types or sabotage your competition by peaceful or brutal means. Because of course your pizza is the best, regardless if it tastes the best, and if anyone says otherwise, the unforeseen things may happen to their establishments. You've no way of telling what they'll be, but you feel that something unspeakable, something terrible might. And we wouldn't want that now, would we? Pizza Tycoon is a true gem which I love to bits, and real fun title to play either in a single or multiplayer. And since Amiga version never got the English release, this PC outing is easily the best one and deserved way more recognition internationally than it ever got. Pocket Rockets is an unusual racing game that sadly, at least in my eyes, is not great. Instead of regular racing, facing the opponents on track and fighting for the spots, you're drag racing and running circuits. And you do it all alone. There's no opponents, none there you could compete against other than the score table. Or timetable, I should say, really. Boring. So Pocket Rockets' only appeal really is competing against your real-life friends in hot seat, alternating to see which one of you will come on top. And given how many great games we had on the system, Pocket Rockets had an uphill start and never really got any further than those first few steps upwards. Drag races are viewed from a side perspective and are all about correct gear switching and top speed, while circuits are all that too, but are viewed from behind the bike. Did I mention that I don't like Pocket Rockets yet? I don't. It's lacking, uninspired, and most importantly and worst of all, not fun. It does let you pick between 4 bikes of Suzuki Katana, Kawasaki Ninja, Yamaha FZR, and Honda Hurricane, so at least there's that, I suppose. Prohibition on PC sucks. Well, it sucked in real life too, not only because it limited freedom and access to beverages adults should have access to, if they please that is, but also because it created a grey area, where many would turn to their own hidden home brewing and criminal rates would skyrocket as well. Our today's prohibition sucks because of 2 things. First of all, presentation. The game looks god-awful in its CGA design using a mind-blowing 4 colors. And it's not even well-fitting 4 colors, but one of the few terrible palettes that CGA offered. It's disappointing to say the least. Then there's the PC speaker sounds, which I wouldn't usually mind as much being used to them and all, but together with the graphics they make the game overall feel unimpressive. Sadly, that's not all yet. The gameplay in my eyes is entirely 8-bit in its design, and no wonder as Prohibition came out on 8-bit micros of the time too. It's beyond simple. It's a shooting gallery type of a game with a limited set of enemies, no extra weapons or power-ups, and no novelties of any kind. You're facing a scrollable row of buildings and you shoot gangsters that pop up in various spots on the screen. You get few seconds head start per gangster until he shoots at you. You can theoretically hide until the timer restarts, but it can't be done all the time. After each, as you can see, simple stage, there's a bonus one where you shoot at gangsters in the room and not outside. There you can't hide anymore and the timer is even more restricted. As you progress through the game, it becomes faster and faster and enemies are more difficult to find and hit. So, as you see, the gameplay design is beyond basic, which would be okay on a simpler system, but by 1987 we had games like Defender of the Crown on PC, which compared to this is like 600 pages long book compared to a leaflet written in a broken English. Similar to what you hear coming from me in my videos. Pulsoid is an Arkanoid-like game with a touch of Snake for good measure. For the most part, it plays like an Arkanoid with destructible colorful bricks at the top of the screen and paddle you control at the bottom. But if I'm to be frank, the whole Snake-like addition to the gameplay is completely unnecessary. But whatever, it is what it is. The snakes replaces balls that you usually see in games in the genre, and they can grow larger in size or shrink by breaking blocks with plus and minus signs on them respectively. Other than that, everything else seems to be identical to any other Arkanoid clone out there. So there are different blocks, and when broken can drop both power-up and power-downs of a typical for the genre kinds. There are enemies showing up from time to time and serving no real purpose other than just to misdirect the snake and add to the randomness of gameplay. In fact, Pulsoid even offers a special optional Arkanoid mode that replaces the snakes with traditional balls. And guess what? It plays the same, only proving that the snakes were just a gimmick. I'm not judging, you do what you can to sell your game, it's just an observation. Come to think of it, I believe Pulsoid was a freeware, so disregard that mention of sales. It featured 32 built-in levels, option to download level files and even a level editor, which prolonged its stay and playability considerably and once again proved that snakes were not necessary. And the fact that you could enjoy it with a friend in a simultaneous multiplayer made this already pretty fun title even better. Kinda like ketchup makes the fries. You don't really need it, but it fits perfectly. Also, and I'm gonna be a bit controversial here, I've heard many times about fries with mayo and disregarded it as a missed combo for a long while, until one of those adventurous afternoons I decided to give it a go, and oh my days, it shouldn't work, but it does so well. I'd risk saying that better than ketchup. Peaceful Kingdom of Duckland was invaded by the army of monsters, who kidnapped and hold your friends hostage. Believe it or not, but all that happened when you were dozing off. And that's what happens when the hero is overworked from all the world and universe saving. You're forgiven though because of the aforementioned heroics, and also cause you will save them in the end. We've used to it by now and I know that you will. So, you must traverse through 5 islands in the Duckland archipelago, defeating the monsters and searching for your friends. Punky Duck is a third-person 3D shooter with some very basic adventuring elements. Namely, on each of the islands that you fight the monsters on, you also have to find the plan for the device required to move to the next, and then find all the necessary components to build that apparatus to progress. Before you're able to leave though, you have to defeat the end level, or end island to be precise, bosses. As you go about your quest, you will collect new weapons, ammunition for them, invincibility, jetpacks, extra lives and dollars. There's 5 islands in total, each is differently themed, and when you get to the last, you'll be able to finally save your friends. Now, since you collect money, each island has a shop somewhere, where you can spend it in exchange for items, and it's good to memorize where these shops are. I always thought that Punky Duck's engine looked eerily similar to the one used in Magic Carpet. It's obviously not the same, but they look alike. though at closer inspection it appears that the one in Magic Carpet might have been more advanced, even if it came few years earlier. Overall, Punky Duck is a funky quack and an excellent simple shooter. If you like those, don't skip it. Pyro 2 is another game that's gonna impress you with flashy graphics, beautiful melodic memorable music and high quality sounds. In fact, it's as simple presentation-wise as it's possible, and probably only marginally better looking than some of those ancient entirely text-based games. Pyro 2 uses what looks like modified ASCII character table to present its graphics in text-based mode, with blocks and simple symbols rather than sprites. Music is non-existent, and farts coming out of the PC speaker are all that you will really get to hear while playing. It's gotta be terrible then, right? Actually, it's not. It's probably one of the better entirely ASCII games ever released. Some say that Minesweepers only make mistakes once. Pyromaniac, it seems, at least according to the game's story, is alike. So, you are one. A pyromaniac that is, and you have a very unusual psychopathic system for burning the buildings down. You sneak into them couple of days early and spread gas bottles in strategic locations to facilitate the best potential future burn. This part of the game is not something that you actually do, as the levels have gas canisters preset as a quote-unquote puzzle for you to solve when playing. On the day of ignition, you take the elevator to the very top floor of the building, light the fuse behind you as you run with it rolling off the rail that you carry. Following you just a few steps behind is the fire and potential catastrophic destruction. Your goal is to get all the way from the top floor to the bottom unscathed and with as much fire damage left behind as possible, because you're scored on the amount of fire that spreads. It's worth pointing out that you can pick up gas canisters on your way and then either put them away in a strategically better location by stopping, or spreading it around the area, letting it leak from the canister when you drop it while moving. Keep in mind though that you have to do it all the while constantly monitoring your distance from the fire and running away from the ever-lit fuse and explosions that follow. There are two campaigns in the game: World Terrorist, that has a terrible YouTube algorithm name and is available from the get-go. It sees you burning famous buildings all over the world one by one, and Secret Agent campaign, which is unlocked while playing, and sends you into communist countries to burn their monuments to the ground. Also not great for the algorithm. Pyro 2 is a simple game, both in terms of its looks and gameplay, but it's so surprisingly addictive that if you honestly give it 10 minutes of your time, you'll end up playing it much longer, as it will seduce you into its enchanting gameplay loop. It's worth noting that unusually for the 1990, there is actually a tutorial in Pyro 2, and it's short and easy to follow, so just the way I like them. Imagine Xbox's famous Geometry Wars and then simplify it to the core of what it is. So a twin-stick space shooter. Then add nothing more other than the neat 3D effect to the background grid that will sway the grid in relation to your on-screen location. If you do all that, you'll end up with our next game, Quadnet. In it you're not using twin sticks per se, but two sets of keys on a keyboard. Potato potato, I know, but the difference between the sticks and keyboard is huge comfort and accuracy-wise, so I felt it's worth pointing out. One set of keys for direction movement, the other for shots. It may seem limiting without diagonals at first, but you'll quickly get used to it, as both you and the enemies also only move on the two axes. You on X and Y, and the enemies on diagonal ones. There's no weapon upgrades or special power-ups to speak of in Quadnet, but it's also not a game made to last for long single-game sessions. It's a fast attack score title that is made to challenge the player's skills in trying to beat the high score, and not to play for hours on end. So, all that really changes the longer you play is the number of enemies, their graphics a tiny bit too, and how fast they move. And whether you want to or not, you will die eventually, as Quadnet was conceptualized to be very demanding and unforgiving of any mistakes. What it's also designed for though, is to be played in any way you want. So you may very well hang out in the middle of the screen, reacting to the enemies and trying to work out around the spot, as it gives you plenty of freedom to maneuver in and out of danger, or plant yourself at the bottom of the screen, trying to play it Galaxian style, and anything in between. While it's definitely simple in its concept title, Quadnet is decently fun and incredibly hectic after a while, with a lot of on-screen action, plenty of near deaths and oh shit moments. It's also an excellent pick if you have a friend that is competitive, cause then it can become really addictive, especially if you're both at similar skill level and keep one-upping each other, swapping the spot on the leaderboards. I know, I already said that Pyro 2 was addictive, but both of these, given the right mindset and situation, can easily become the highlights of a gaming afternoon. Redneck Rampage is a first-person shooter made using Duke Nukem's 3D build engine and themed to take place in a fictional small backwater town of Hickston, Arkansas. So, most of the locales that you'll visit will be appropriately set in the barnyards, trailer parks, chicken processing plant, bowling alley, drive-in movie theater and the likes in and around the town. You'll be practically able to feel the stench of manure while playing. Story-wise, as in most other FPSs, aliens invaded Earth. But unlike in the other shooters, they did not took it over in a fiery blaze destroying anything and anyone in their way, they only cloned all inhabitants of Hickston, replacing them with their own copies, and worst of all, stole your prize pig Bessie. And she was a beauty, I must add. So, you, playing as Leonard along with your brother Baba, have to recover Bessie as she's priceless. She's a part of the family after all, and not just any random pig.
I'm Batman.
Yeah, okay, let's say that you're part of my now too, Bruce. What? Sure, yeah, I'd save you too if I had to. He's been getting increasingly more needy these last few months. He really must feel alone. Anyway, all the weapons and pickups in Redneck Rampage are thematically stylized too, so items like beer, pork rinds and moonshine will not only replenish your health, but also cause you to respectively burp, fart and sway while walking, which is not only a nice touch, but also causes you to be unable to sneak on the enemies, which are all different and all have unique and funny tones that they'll use when you're around. In fact, the game is chock full of very hillbilly-like humor, which, while fun in little doses, gets old quickly and soon enough you'll have enough of the same one-liners. Interestingly enough, most levels don't have the exit door, but end with you having to find your brother and then knock him out. Not kill, knock out with a crowbar, cause he's your brother. You know, redneck style. Redneck Rampage's presentation is top-notch, the engine is pushed to the absolute limits and I don't think that there's much more that could be squeezed out of it. The textures are beautiful, the locale is believable and enemies fun and unique. Music runs straight off the CD and the sounds are poetry of village noises, beautiful and awful, animal or otherwise. If you like FPS games, this one's a no-brainer. It's fast, fun and not overly difficult. It's worth noting that there's Caspack add-on for Redneck Rampage and it does exactly what it says on the tin. Adds curses to the game. Is that necessary? Not really, but it's a nice touch if you want your games less PC. Return of the Phantom is a mystery point-and-click adventure game based on the book Phantom of the Opera. You're Raoul Montant, a detective who's been asked by his friend Monsieur Brie, yes, like the cheese that's stinky but oh so delicious, who's the manager of the opera, to investigate the crime scene and solve the mystery of the Phantom, namely reason for the chandelier crashing during one of the performances right into the crowd. Apparently, a phantom is the one who's blamed for it. He's a mysterious creature that's said to have been haunting the opera for over a century, which raises a series of questions like why stay there and not move to the new location if it's haunted, how come there hasn't been anything done about it in the last 100 years or so, who still believes in ghosts and hauntings. But whatever, it's probably video game logic issue. Anyway, you'll be searching for clues and solving puzzles, believe it or not, but what you did not expect is that it's not only going to happen in the present, but also the past too. And slowly, bit by bit, you'll piece the detective mystery puzzle in full, learning of everything that took place in the opera. The building, its canals, secret hallways and surrounding area is where most of the game takes place, and it's huge. The fact that you get to experience it twice, in different periods, effectively doubles the size of the game world. It also multiplies number of characters you meet and interact with. Presentation-wise, Return of the Phantom is pretty good, with what could be called industry-standard graphics for the time, but it's not gonna blow your mind. What will though is the story, that may seem a bit vague after my short brief initial mention of it, but it's really interestingly told, and the more you play, the more you'll grow curious how will the adventure wrap up in the end. If any of that sounds interesting, then make sure to track down and check out the Return of the Phantom. Ripley's Believe It or Not, The Riddle of Master Lu is not only incredibly long-titled game, but also an excellent, even if largely unknown example of an FMV game that's not bad at all. It's not an interactive movie though, as you really take part in the story and can influence it to a degree. All characters are digitized and displayed on pre-rendered backgrounds and the game plays like your typical adventure. So you'll visit different locations around the world, meet many colorful characters, and most importantly solve tons upon tons of puzzles. Most of them are inventory based, but they're always rooted in logic, and if you pay attention to what you find, learn, and during conversations, you should not have too many issues solving them. So, it's worth treating people with respect, as otherwise they may refuse sharing an important part of the puzzle. It's actually worth to do it in real life too, and that's a life lesson from me to you. Riddles are not obvious in their solutions though, so it's not just an oversimplified gameplay wrapped around FMV presentation either. I haven't said anything about the story yet, have I? I think not. So, you're Robert Ripley, a famous traveler and collector of rarities, who after being attacked on one of his travels in Egypt, end up in Beijing on a trail of Chinese assassins. And as the story will unfold, you'll end up seeing seeing big chunk of the world, chasing the leads all over the globe. All to solve the mystery surrounding the tomb of the first emperor of China. Interestingly enough, Robert Ripley was a real-life historical person, so unusually for the genre, you'll get to portray someone who actually existed. Perhaps the story is a little bit made up, but Robert at the very least isn't. The Riddle of Master Lu, with its captivating plot, stellar presentation, fun puzzles and unquestionable charm, will be a very rewarding experience if you decide to give it a go, which I would recommend if you're at least a little into adventure games. Rollerblade Racer is an isometric top-down arcade action sports game. I know, it's a lot to process, but think of it as Paperboy, short of newspapers and different playing. Wow, that's even more convoluted. Let's try again. You're a rollerblader, and you're one of the best, perhaps the best. But it's not been proven, and since you know that you're good enough, you decide to do just that. Prove your skills and become recognized as the single best, as the unquestionable urban legend. So, you aim to enter and win the prestigious Super Rollerblade Challenge, a race to prove who's who in the, let's be frank here, niche and largely unimportant world of rollerblading. To do so, you'll need to qualify by earning at least 5,000 points and completing several obstacle courses. So you'll be competing in the courses everywhere, from suburbs through city streets and parks to beaches, and everywhere in between. You'll earn most points not only by completing the courses fast under its assigned time limit, but also by performing variety of tricks, special rollerblading moves and jumps. There are also bonus rounds that will test your agility by having you navigate through cones or barrels. Overall, you need to complete all events to be able to take part in the Super Rollerblade Challenge, and depending on your score in it, so 10,000, 15,000 or 20,000, you'll place third, second or first respectively. Unless you fail, cause you know, that's also a viable option in video gaming. Anyway, there's two characters to choose from, but other than the gender, they don't really differ much from each other. Graphics are pretty decent, at least in VGA, and generally speaking, look like a better Paperboy. Sounds are, well, in the game, but they're not gonna blow you away coming from a PC speaker only, and they don't really complement the gameplay in any way. In the end, Rollerblade Racer is an average title, not one you'll be actively seeking out to purchase and play, but if you do have it already, it's also not bad enough to avoid and can be fun from time to time between other, better games. Rotor is a 2D top-down sci-fi action game. You're piloting a craft around various large enemy fortresses that happen to look like mazes, with a task of infiltrating them, destroying enemy installations, and collecting any useful gadgets that you may find. While I mentioned destruction and that you can shoot in Rotor, it's not really a shooter per se. Your shots will be mostly useful in traversal for removing of enemy installations that will fire at you otherwise. Your craft is susceptible to gravity, so not only you have to counter it constantly while moving, but also keep in mind that it's influenced by your ship's changing weight and limited supply of fuel. The movement itself feels like a mix between lunar lander and asteroids, so if you like the formula, you'll love it here. All enemies and walls are deadly upon contact, so keep your distance at all times. There are also boxes spread around the fortresses and they can contain fuel, that's used for flying and shooting, sun crystals. Collecting set number of these allows you to complete the stage and move to the next, so they're arguably the most important pickup. Bombs, from which you can either run off the screen not to fall a victim to, as they explode in between 30 to 60 seconds, or pick them up for extra points, but they add to your ship's weight. And finally, pearls, that allow you to upgrade your ship, increasing speed, engine strength, weapon, shield and so on. You can pick the boxes by hovering over them and using tractor beam, kinda like in Star Trek. And everything with a bit of Star Trek in it is that little bit better than it would have been without it. Fact. Enemies are always immobile and fall into either active or passive categories. Active would be your run-of-the-mill turrets that just shoot in the straight line, and passive are the attractors and repulsors that pull and push you away respectively, and force fields that need to be turned off by finding and shooting appropriate to them switches. Rotor is a careful action game, if I may call it that. Because while it requires you to take often prompt actions all throughout, it rewards a methodic, slower is faster approach, rather than the all-out full-speed guns blazing gameplay. So if you like games like that, you'll have a hell of a time playing Rotor. RS2 is an arcade horizontally scrolling single-player shoot-'em-up, and while it may not be as addictive as the likes of Tyrion or Raiden or even R-Type, it's a very decent and fun shooter nonetheless, even if a bit on the more difficult side. RS2 is composed out of numerous levels, always ending with a boss fight, and it's a memorization shooter, meaning it's best to memorize by heart patterns of both enemy waves and boss movements to be able to score high in it. and since there's quite a lot of either, there's a lot to remember. And as someone who's a carrier of a very picky brain that on its own filters through everything I hear, see or learn throughout the day, and then picks only what it deems necessary or useful to remember, I can tell you right now that it's not a game for me. I know that I will never remember this and will always approach RS2 as a twitch shooter, which is not a recipe for success here, I'm afraid. That's me though, and you may have no issues with forming plenty of small and useless short-term memories. The game features quite a few power-ups too. They come in the form of yellow orbs with a letter in them, each letter corresponding to another weapon. So K is half-moon shots, B is target-seeking fireballs, S is scatter shot, and L is laser beams. And these should be best chosen in anticipation of upcoming bosses, as grabbing multiple bonuses of the same kind doesn't make the shot stronger, so each pickup just changes its type, meaning you're not losing anything by picking an appropriate one for the boss to come. Additionally, there's no lives in RS2, just a health bar, and when it's down to 0, it's game over. So yeah, there's that. RS2's presentation is decent, even if not great, but not an issue that would detract from playing. I couldn't find any high-quality framerate footage for it, so sadly what you see is what you get today. It looks better in reality. Saban's is no good. And it's another game I couldn't find any high-quality footage for. Hopefully, this will be representative enough for you to be able to learn about the game and decide if it's something you'd like to try. In essence, it's an action platformer based on a French comic book of the same title. It was also only ever released in Dutch, which may have been the biggest limiting factor in its popularity. Though, and I'm stepping a bit out of order here, I never liked it. The language, however, is totally irrelevant as it's a platformer and most of its gaming appeal comes from its action arcade nature and not walls of text. Your Grand Vizier is no good, both of these I've no doubt butchered here, and you have to get rid of the Caliph of Baghdad to become the next Caliph yourself. And to do so, like in most other platformers, you'll have to complete numerous levels, beat many enemies of various kinds, and face different challenges, whatever they may be. All levels are timed and end with a boss that you must learn and memorize the pattern of, or just overpower to be able to carry on. As you go about your adventure, you'll be picking up different objects that increase your life points as well as better weapons. Graphically, Eyes No Good doesn't look bad, it shares similarities with Donkey Kong Country on SNES, as all of its graphics short of some backgrounds also seems like a pre-rendered 3D objects converted into sprites. Personally, I was never a fan of the tech, but some people seem to like it. Gameplay-wise, Saban's is no good, is a nightmare, it's needlessly difficult, controls seem to be all over the place, sometimes responding perfectly to your inputs, sometimes feeling a bit off, and it's hard to predict how they'll behave each time you make a risky move. It's frustrating to say the least. But I initially stated that I was never a fan, so keep in mind that I may be a bit prejudiced towards the game. Is No Goat also released on PlayStation, but since I've never played it on Sony's Dream Machine, I can't tell you if it's any better there. Savage is what my boss's wife gets whenever anyone questions her decisions, shows her another point of view, or simply when she wants to telegraph her superiority over her subordinates. She's not great, as a boss or a human. I mean, neither is he, but he's a bit better. At least you know what, why and whom is the reason of his constant and never-ending fury and anger. So he's more manageable, so to speak. This Savage, however, is a fantasy-themed action arcade game. It features bare-chested Conan the Barbarian wannabe type of a hero, the titular Savage. You start trapped in a castle from which you have to escape to eventually find and rescue your love, who coincidentally also have been captured by the same forces of evil, but is imprisoned in another location. Gameplay of Savage is built out of 3 entirely different design concepts, together forming a complete and not so bad title. I mean, it's not great, but not terrible either. It's average, and as such it's worth completing if you ever get a chance, once. The first part of the game is your horizontally scrolling shooter/runner, meaning your character runs from left to right shooting, not stopping for anything, killing buddies and jumping over obstacles. You also collect treasures and weapon upgrades here. Second is a first-person perspective shooter similar in its design to Space Harrier, where you shoot off evil skulls and avoid monoliths. In third and last, you morph into Eagle and fly in horizontally scrolling platform-like stages, avoiding timed traps and shooting at the enemies. It's where you also gain power-ups by shooting bubbles. The first two are quite fun, the last is way too demanding as compared to the other. It's not a game-breaking issue, but the progression is definitely uneven. Each of the game modes is okay at best, and nothing to write home about, but all 3 put together form a pretty fun and complete package, even if not great looking or sounding. That said, Savage came out in 1989 and could run even on the potatoest of potato PCs, so those sporting 8080 or 8088 CPUs, meaning its hardware requirements were very forgiving. 286 was a powerhouse for this game. Not enough to run it butter smooth, but plenty enough for a fluid and enjoyable gameplay. And with this video, the second season wraps up today. Another 100 obscure DOS games we've revisited or seen for the first time together. What do you think of them? Any of them were particularly memorable or worth playing even today? I definitely learned of some new ones and was happy to share memories of others. Anyway, let me know if you liked the video and if you're looking forward to the obviously coming third season. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.